Have you ever wondered what people in the Middle Ages dreamed about when they finally drifted to sleep in candlelit rooms, under heavy wool blankets, with the sound of church bells echoing faintly in the night? Dreams have always fascinated humankind, but in the medieval world, they carried even greater weight. They weren't seen as random images in the mind, but as messages sometimes from God, sometimes from angels, and sometimes, so it was believed, from darker, more unsettling forces. To the medieval imagination, dreams could reveal hidden truths, predict the future, or warn of dangers yet to come. In this episode of History for Sleep, we'll wander through the mysterious dream world of the Middle Ages. From royal courts to peasant cottages, we'll uncover what people thought their dreams meant, the symbols that haunted their nights, and the way entire books were written to decode what dreams were trying to say. You'll hear about monks recording visions of heaven and hell, merchants worrying over dreams of coins and animals, and everyday villagers puzzling over dreams of bread, water, or storms. Each dream, no matter how small, was believed to carry a deeper meaning. So, as you get comfortable and prepare to drift into rest, let your mind step into the past. Imagine the flicker of a torch on stone walls, the hush of a medieval village at night, and the world of dreams slowly unfolding before you. Together, we'll explore not just what people dreamed about, but how those dreams shaped their fears, their hopes, and their daily lives. Before we begin, I'd love for you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps us grow and lets us bring you even more relaxing journeys through history. And in the comments below, tell me what historical topics you'd like to hear about. And when you usually listen in, do you drift off right away? Or do you stay with the stories until the very end? Settle in, breathe deeply, and let's begin our journey into the dreamscapes of the Middle Ages. When we imagine the medieval night, it's important to pause and strip away our modern assumptions. Today, we fall asleep in brightly lit cities, with glowing screens, artificial clocks, and sometimes even a background hum of traffic. But in the Middle Ages, the experience of night was entirely different, and this difference shaped the way people slept, and in turn, the dreams they reported and interpreted. To understand what people dreamed about in the Middle Ages, we first need to set the stage, the medieval night itself. Picture a small village around the 12th century. As the sun set, the entire world seemed to change. Without electricity, darkness descended heavily, almost tangibly. The fading light of day gave way to flickering torches or candles, but these were luxuries. Wax candles, in particular, were expensive, and peasants often had to rely on cheaper tallow candles or the warmth of the hearth fire. For many families, once the fire was banked for the evening, the house was plunged into deep shadow. Sleep did not come all at once. In medieval households, it was common to sleep in shared spaces. A family might gather together in one large bed, or several beds within the same room. Privacy was rare. In wealthier households, servants might also share the chamber with their lords, sleeping on pallets or even on the floor. This closeness meant that dreams, when shared aloud, often became communal experiences. If someone stirred from a vivid nightmare, their whispers or mutterings might be overheard, turning a personal vision into a household story by morning. The sounds of the medieval night were also very different from what most of us know. Instead of the constant hum of modern machinery, the silence of night was broken by natural noises. The howling of wolves on the edge of the forest, the hoot of an owl, or the distant croak of frogs by a stream. In towns, there might be the occasional clatter of a night watchman's staff, or the ringing of church bells marking the canonical hours. Midnight was not merely a poetic time, but an audible one, measured by bells that called monks to prayer. For villagers, those bells were faint reminders of a world beyond their cottage walls. This atmosphere fed directly into dreams. Medieval people lived in a world where spiritual and physical boundaries blurred in the night. The darkness was thought to be a liminal time when spirits and demons prowled more freely. when God might speak through visions, and when the human soul was at its most vulnerable. Sleep was not just rest for the body, it was a passage into an uncertain realm. One fascinating detail of medieval sleep is the pattern of first sleep and second sleep. Historical records suggest that people often went to bed not long after nightfall, slept for several hours, then woke in the middle of the night before drifting back into a second sleep. This waking period was not considered unusual. In fact, it was used for prayer, reading, quiet conversations, or even visiting neighbors in the village. The period between first and second sleep was sometimes called the watch. It was a time when dreams from the first part of the night might be reflected upon, discussed, or written down by literate monks. Some even believed that dreams occurring before midnight were less trustworthy, while those in the early morning carried greater weight, as the soul was thought to be pure after long rest. In castles and monasteries, the sleeping arrangements differed, but still carried symbolic weight. A knight in a stone chamber might sleep beneath tapestries that depicted saints or heraldic animals. These images could easily bleed into the mind, creating dreamscapes filled with lions, dragons, or holy figures. Monks, who slept in dormitories with rows of narrow beds, often saw dreams as potential distractions from their spiritual path, but also as potential revelations. In some abbeys, monks were encouraged to write down remarkable dreams, especially if they seemed to carry moral lessons or warnings for the community. Beyond the physical environment, the medieval night was shaped by fears and superstitions. Darkness was associated with danger, sin, and the devil. To sleep unprotected was risky, so people often performed rituals before bed. A villager might recite a prayer, make the sign of the cross, or keep a charm beneath the pillow to guard against nightmares. Some households placed iron objects by the bed, believing they repelled evil spirits. This protective atmosphere demonstrates how sleep was not considered a passive state, but an active crossing into another world, one where the boundaries of reality loosened. Dreams, then, were not separate from the night. They were part of the medieval nightscape. When someone dreamed of a dark forest, a blazing fire, or a procession of figures, it echoed the sounds, sights, and anxieties that surrounded them. A farmer who heard wolves howling might dream of being pursued by a beast. A child who fell asleep by the flickering fire might dream of flames consuming their home. A monk awakened by bells might dream of angels calling him heavenward. In each case, the night itself seeped into the dream world. We should also remember that medieval people often told and retold their dreams in the morning. Families gathered around the hearth or in the fields might share what they had seen, much as we today might talk about a vivid movie. These shared retellings reinforced the importance of dreams. A farmer's wife might recall dreaming of rain, and the household would wonder if it foretold a coming storm. A merchant might dream of coins, and his companions would take it as a sign of fortune or greed. Dreams were woven into the rhythm of daily life, but the stage for all of them was the medieval night, heavy with silence, mystery, and expectation. Even the architecture of the time influenced dream experiences. Thick stone walls muffled sound, creating deeper silence than we know in thin-walled modern homes. That silence could make dreams feel even more vivid, as the mind supplied its own visions in the absence of external noise. Conversely, in crowded village cottages where animals sometimes slept indoors, the constant presence of livestock meant that dreams of cows, sheep, or pigs were common reflections of the environment, rather than random inventions of the mind. The medieval night, then, was not simply a backdrop, but an active participant in dream culture. Darkness was thick, sound was different, and the spiritual atmosphere charged. To fall asleep in such a world was to surrender not only to rest, but to the possibility of encountering something larger: divine visions, demonic temptations, or prophetic glimpses of the future. For medieval people, the night was a gateway, and dreams were the path through it. As we continue this journey, Keep in mind that every dream we'll explore in the coming chapters began in this unique setting. Imagine yourself lying on a straw-stuffed mattress, listening to the last crackle of the fire, with the scent of wood smoke in the air and the chill of night creeping in through shuttered windows. In that silence, the mind opens and the dream world beckons. For people in the Middle Ages, dreams were not just fleeting images that appeared in the mind at night. They were seen as profound, meaningful events that could bridge the earthly world and the divine. In a time when religion shaped nearly every part of life, when the church calendar ordered the seasons, when saints were invoked in everyday tasks, and when eternity weighed heavily on the imagination, it is no surprise that many believed dreams could be messages from God himself. This belief was deeply rooted in the Bible. Medieval Christians read or heard read aloud stories of dreams and visions that carried divine importance. They knew that Joseph, son of Jacob, had interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and saved Egypt from famine. They remembered that Joseph, husband of Mary, had been warned in a dream to flee into Egypt with the infant Jesus, saving the Holy Family from Herod's wrath. Prophets throughout the Old Testament were depicted as men who received revelations in visions of the night. To medieval people, these examples proved that God had always spoken through dreams and might still be doing so. In monasteries, churches, and even in the humblest villages, this scriptural foundation gave dreams a special weight. If someone dreamed of angels or a shining light, it could be interpreted as a divine blessing or a call to holiness. If a dream seemed to warn of disaster, it was taken seriously, often leading to prayer, fasting, or acts of penance in the hope of averting calamity. In an age when illness, famine, and sudden death were constant threats, the idea that God might whisper warnings through dreams was not only comforting but also practical. The church played an important role in shaping how dreams were understood. Learned clerics and theologians debated whether all dreams could be trusted. Not every vision was from God, they argued. St. Augustine, a towering figure in Christian thought, warned that some dreams came from the body's natural processes, others from troubling spirits, and only a few from the divine. Still, even Augustine admitted that God could and did speak through dreams, especially to those who were pure of heart. Later theologians carried this caution forward. Yes, dreams might contain messages from heaven, but one had to discern carefully. Despite these warnings, the everyday faithful often leaned toward believing that their dreams carried meaning. A farmer who dreamed of a shining figure might rush to confess his sins, thinking he had been given a chance to repent. A widow who dreamed of her departed husband might interpret it as a comfort sent by God, a reminder that the soul lived on. These experiences were not rare. Medieval sermons sometimes included dream stories, encouraging listeners to pay attention to the visions they received. There are countless recorded examples of divine dreams in medieval chronicles. One particularly striking story comes from the life of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the great 12th century monk. It was said that Bernard once dreamed of the Virgin Mary, who encouraged and strengthened him in his spiritual struggles. For his followers, this was proof that holy dreams could guide the faithful and inspire great deeds. In another account, a bishop in France dreamed of a collapsing cathedral and awoke convinced that repairs were urgently needed. When a section of the building later gave way, his dream was remembered as a divine warning. Royal courts, too, took divine dreams seriously. Kings and queens, ever anxious about the stability of their rule, often turned to visions for reassurance. Chroniclers recorded that before great battles, rulers sometimes dreamed of saints promising victory. When such battles were won, the dreams were remembered and retold as evidence of God's favor. If the battle was lost, dreams might be reinterpreted as ignored warnings, emphasizing the king's failure to listen. In monasteries, dreams were woven into the spiritual fabric of life. Monks and nuns often kept records of extraordinary visions, especially those that aligned with Scripture. Some dreamed of paradise, filled with gardens and angelic choirs, and took this as a foretaste of heaven. Others dreamed of stern warnings, seeing their souls judged and punished for sins. These were not dismissed as mere nightmares, but were seen as calls to reform, guiding the dreamer toward a stricter, holier life. The divine weight of dreams was also tied to the rhythms of prayer. Because monks rose at night for the canonical hours matins and lauds, the dreams they experienced just before waking often felt especially significant. A dream that lingered as the bell rang for prayer seemed almost woven into the voice of God calling them. To ignore it would feel careless, even dangerous. But divine dreams were not reserved for the holy or the learned. Ordinary villagers, too, believed that God might reach down into their humble cottages and speak through dreams. A mother might dream of her child in danger and rush to protect them. A shepherd might dream of wolves and keep a closer watch on his flock. To the medieval imagination, God cared for all souls, and his messages could come to anyone, regardless of rank. There was also a strong belief that the saints could appear in dreams as messengers of God. People reported seeing St. Peter, St. Mary Magdalene, or St. Nicholas in their sleep, offering comfort or instruction. In an age when relics of saints were treasured and pilgrimages were made to their shrines, these dream encounters were seen as powerful and personal blessings. If a sick person dreamed of a saint, they might believe healing was on the way. If a sinner dreamed of a saint rebuking them, it was time for confession and penance. It is easy to imagine how powerful these dreams must have felt in a world where the divine was always near. Unlike today, when we often separate dreams from faith, medieval people lived in a universe where heaven and earth were tightly bound together. A dream was not just a private mental event. It was part of God's ongoing conversation with the world. Of course, dreams were also interpreted within the larger framework of morality. A dream of light, order, or angelic beings was seen as good and holy. A dream of darkness, chaos, or monstrous figures might be divine too, but as a warning rather than a blessing. God's messages could be gentle or stern, comforting or frightening, but all were meant to guide the soul. In many ways, dreams in the Middle Ages acted as sermons of the night. By day, priests and preachers gave instruction from the pulpit. By night, God might preach directly through the language of dreams. For medieval people, sleep was not an escape from the spiritual life, but an extension of it. Each dream was a potential message, a note from heaven written in the symbols of the subconscious. As we leave this chapter, imagine lying in a darkened medieval chamber, the air heavy with wood smoke, the distant toll of bells marking the hours. You close your eyes and drift into sleep. Suddenly, a shining figure appears, or a voice speaks words you cannot forget. When you awaken, you would not shrug it off as a random thought. You would rise convinced that God himself had visited you in the night. For this was the world of the Middle Ages, where dreams were not just dreams, but windows into the divine. If divine visions were one side of medieval dreams, their dark mirror was the nightmare. To people in the Middle Ages, the night was not only a time when God might whisper through visions, but also when sinister forces prowled, seeking to disturb sleep and corrupt the soul. Nightmares were not dismissed as the natural consequence of indigestion or stress, as modern science might explain them. Instead, they were seen as tangible evidence of the devil's interference, demonic trickery, or the presence of restless spirits. To fall prey to a nightmare was to experience a brush with evil. The very word nightmare itself carries traces of these old beliefs. In many European languages, terms for nightmares suggested something heavy pressing down on the sleeper. This was not accidental. One of the most persistent medieval fears was of demonic beings, sometimes called incubi or succubi, who visited the vulnerable during sleep. These beings were believed to sit upon the chest, suffocating or tempting the dreamer, and leaving them terrified or drained upon waking. Reports of these nighttime assaults can be found across Europe, from monastic writings to village tales told by the hearth. Imagine a medieval peasant lying on a straw mattress, drifting into sleep after a long day of labor. Suddenly, in the darkness of the dream, they might feel a weight pressing down on their chest, unable to move, unable to breathe. In the morning, they would not think of sleep paralysis or disrupted REM cycles. They would believe firmly that a demon had visited them. And so the nightmare became not just a private terror, but a shared cultural fear. Nightmares were also thought to reveal the moral state of the dreamer. If one dreamed of sinful pleasure's lust, greed, gluttony, it was often interpreted as the devil toying with the soul, tempting it into corruption. The incubus and succubus were especially feared because they were believed to stir sexual dreams. Monks and nuns who experienced such visions often confessed them as sins, even if they had no control over them, believing that evil forces were exploiting their vulnerability. This led to a deep connection between nightmares and morality. Bad dreams were warnings not only of spiritual danger from without, but also of weakness within. Folklore across medieval Europe is filled with variations of these beliefs. In Germanic regions, the nightmare was sometimes personified as a malicious spirit known as the Mare, a being who rode sleepers and caused terrifying visions. In Scandinavian traditions, people spoke of the Mara, a witch-like figure who crept into rooms at night. In England, tales circulated of witches or evil spirits who could transform themselves into animals and slip through keyholes to torment sleepers. Each culture added its own flavor, but the common thread was clear. Nightmares were not random. They were the work of hostile forces. The Church did not dismiss these fears. In fact, many clerics reinforced them, teaching that the devil often attacked the faithful in their sleep. Sermons warned that the devil prowled most dangerously in the hours of darkness, when the soul was unguarded. Nightmares were not to be ignored. They were signs of a battle being fought for the dreamer's very soul. This belief made nighttime prayers and protective rituals all the more important. People developed many ways to guard against nightmares. Some relied on prayer, reciting the Pater Noster, the Lord's Prayer, or invoking the Virgin Mary before bed. Others hung religious symbols, crosses, rosaries, or saintly medals near their beds to ward off demons. Folk remedies also abounded. A piece of iron, such as a knife or a horseshoe, might be placed under the pillow, since iron was believed to repel evil spirits. Herbs such as St. John's wort or valerian were tucked beneath mattresses, their strong scents thought to keep nightmares at bay. In villages, amulets and charms were sold for the same purpose, blending Christian faith with older pagan traditions. Nightmares could also be seen as warnings of impending disaster. Chroniclers sometimes described rulers who experienced terrifying dreams before calamities struck. A king might dream of armies burning his land or of monstrous beasts devouring his people, and within weeks, famine or rebellion would follow. These stories reinforced the belief that nightmares were not only personal, but cosmic echoes of divine or demonic struggles that touched entire kingdoms. For monks and scholars, nightmares offered rich material for reflection. Some categorized them, trying to distinguish between natural, divine, and demonic visions. A few admitted that heavy food before bed could stir disturbing dreams, but this did not lessen the sense of danger. If anything, overeating was itself a sin, and so the resulting nightmares still carried moral weight. Others carefully recorded their experiences, blending observation with theology. One monk described dreaming of black dogs surrounding him, their glowing eyes filled with hatred, which he interpreted as demons tempting him toward despair. Women, too, often played a central role in nightmare lore. The succubus, an alluring female demon, was believed to prey upon men in their sleep, drawing them into sinful dreams. At the same time, women were sometimes accused of being witches who sent nightmares to others. A villager who suffered repeated terrors at night might suspect a neighbor of witchcraft, leading to accusations and conflicts. Thus, nightmares were not only personal fears, but also social ones, capable of straining relationships and sowing suspicion in tight-knit communities. Despite their terrifying reputation, nightmares were also seen as opportunities. If a dreamer recognized a nightmare as the work of the devil, resisting its temptations or calling upon God in the vision could be a sign of spiritual strength. Just as saints were tested by trials in waking life, ordinary Christians could be tested in their dreams. Overcoming a nightmare through prayer was seen as a small but meaningful victory in the ongoing struggle between good and evil. Stories of saints often included encounters with nightmares. Saint Anthony the Great, though from an earlier period, was said to have been tormented by visions of demons while he slept in the desert. Medieval hagiographers retold such tales, emphasizing that holy men and women could withstand even the fiercest demonic assaults. Their example gave ordinary believers hope. If saints endured these dark nights of the soul, so too could they. In the end, nightmares in the Middle Ages were never just dreams. They were events with spiritual, moral, and social weight. To wake from a terrifying vision was to step back from a battlefield, shaken but alive. The dreamer would rise, cross themselves, perhaps whisper a prayer of thanks, and vow to guard their soul more carefully. Nightmares were reminders of vulnerability, but also of the need for faith. So imagine yourself again in that medieval cottage or monastery cell. The fire has gone out, the room is cold and silent, and you drift into uneasy sleep. A crushing weight presses on your chest. You see a shadow at the foot of your bed. A whisper tempts you with forbidden thoughts. You struggle, you pray, and at last you wake, gasping in the darkness. For the medieval dreamer, this was not a fleeting sensation. It was an encounter with the devil himself. And by surviving it, they believed they had lived through a glimpse of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. In the medieval imagination, dreams were never just personal. They could shape the destiny of entire kingdoms. When a king or queen dreamed, it was not simply the private vision of a ruler. It was a matter of state, a moment when heaven, earth, and politics seemed to converge in the darkness of sleep. To understand how medieval people thought about dreams, we must look closely at the way royal visions were recorded, retold, and interpreted. The lives of rulers in the Middle Ages were saturated with symbolism. Every gesture, every ceremony, every crown and robe was meant to demonstrate divine authority. Kings and queens ruled not just by might, but by the belief that God had chosen them. In such a world, a dream was not simply a flicker of the imagination. It could be interpreted as God's direct involvement in the affairs of the realm. And so, royal dreams were carefully remembered, written into chronicles, and even used to justify political decisions. One of the most famous examples comes from the story of Constantine the Great, whose dream of the Christian cross before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge became legendary. Though this dream predates the medieval period, it profoundly influenced medieval thought. Chroniclers retold it for centuries, presenting Constantine as a ruler chosen by God, guided through visions in the night. Kings and queens who came after him looked to this model, hoping their own dreams might reveal divine approval or prophecy. Medieval chronicles are filled with stories of rulers dreaming before battles. These visions were rarely neutral. They often promised victory or warned of defeat. If a king dreamed of a shining saint handing him a sword, it was taken as a sign that God would grant him triumph. If he dreamed of dark omens, blood in the sky, or a crown crumbling into dust, it was a warning of disaster. Chroniclers sometimes described such dreams in dramatic detail, using them to explain the rise and fall of rulers. In this way, dreams became part of political history, woven into the official story of kingdoms. For queens, dreams could hold special significance, often tied to fertility, succession, and the fate of heirs. In an age when the continuation of a dynasty depended on the birth of sons, dreams of children or animals could be interpreted as signs of coming pregnancy. Queens were sometimes depicted dreaming of lions, eagles, or other powerful beasts, symbols of the strength their sons would one day wield. If a queen dreamed of losing a child, the court might interpret it as a warning of miscarriage or political danger. The language of dream interpretation was so powerful that it could be used strategically. Rulers and their advisors sometimes publicized dreams to strengthen their legitimacy. A king might claim to have dreamed of a saint blessing his coronation, suggesting that his reign was divinely ordained. A queen might tell of a dream in which the Virgin Mary promised protection for her child, reinforcing the sacred nature of the dynasty. These stories were not always spontaneous. They were tools shaped and retold for political purposes. Not all dreams were reassuring. Medieval kings and queens often faced terrifying visions that reflected the fragility of power. A ruler might dream of being stripped of his crown, of standing naked before his enemies, or of being cast down into darkness. Such dreams could inspire genuine fear. Some rulers turned to confessors and bishops to interpret these visions, seeking guidance in how to avert divine punishment. Others ignored them, only to have chroniclers later declare that the king's downfall had been foretold in his dreams. The connection between dreams and rulership also appeared in law and diplomacy. Ambassadors sometimes carried news of royal dreams as part of negotiations, presenting them as signs that God favored one side over another. Dreams could also shape judicial decisions. In a few recorded cases, rulers claimed that God had revealed truths in dreams that influenced their judgments. Though such claims were rare, they show how deeply dreams were woven into the fabric of governance. In literature, too, royal dreams carried symbolic weight. Poets and storytellers often used dreams as dramatic foreshadowing, especially in tales of kings. A monarch might dream of a collapsing tower or a poisoned cup, and readers would understand it as a sign of betrayal or tragedy to come. These literary depictions reflected real beliefs. Audiences expected rulers to dream, and for those dreams to matter. For ordinary people, the dreams of kings and queens were fascinating because they seemed to connect the highest powers of heaven with the highest powers of earth. A villager might never see their monarch in person, but hearing that the king had dreamed of an angel before battle gave them reassurance that God was watching over their realm. Royal dreams were not just private, they were public property, shaping the hopes and fears of entire populations. There are also stories of rulers whose dreams revealed personal struggles. Chroniclers sometimes describe kings who dreamed of their own sins, greed, cruelty, or pride and awoke in fear of God's judgment. Some used these experiences to reform their lives, becoming more charitable or devout. Others ignored them, only to face ruin, which storytellers later framed as divine justice. In this way, royal dreams became moral lessons as well as historical accounts. Queens, too, were sometimes depicted as visionaries in their own right. While kings often dreamed of battles and crowns, queens were more often described dreaming of saints, holy women, or children. These dreams reinforced the idea that queens embodied not only political power, but also spiritual and maternal authority. In hagiographies and miracle stories, queens' dreams were sometimes treated as just as important as those of kings, though chroniclers often framed them in gentler, more symbolic terms. One cannot overlook the way royal dreams inspired art and architecture. In some cases, churches or chapels were built in response to a ruler's dream. A king might claim to have dreamed of a saint pointing to a hill, and upon that hill a shrine would be erected. Pilgrims flocked to these sites, further entwining the ruler's dream with the religious landscape of the realm. Thus, a single night's vision could shape centuries of devotion. Dreams of kings and queens were not always believed uncritically. Skeptics existed, even in the Middle Ages. Some clerics warned that rulers could misuse dreams for propaganda, claiming divine visions to justify wars or taxes. Others pointed out that even kings were subject to the devil's deceptions, and that not every dream of victory was truly from God. Yet despite these warnings, the sheer number of recorded royal dreams shows how deeply they were taken to heart. To step into the medieval royal bedchamber, then, is to enter a world where sleep was never fully private. Every dream carried weight, not only for the dreamer, but for the court, the church, and the people. When a king dreamed of saints, armies marched with greater confidence. When a queen dreamed of children, dynasties held their breath. When a ruler dreamed of downfall, whispers spread through the court, preparing for change. As you imagine this world, picture a king lying beneath heavy velvet covers, the crown resting on a table nearby. Outside, guards pace in the torch-lit courtyard. Inside, the king drifts into sleep and dreams of a radiant figure handing him a golden sword. In the morning, he rises convinced that God has blessed his coming campaign. His counselors nod, the chroniclers sharpen their pens, and an entire kingdom is shaped by the vision of one man in the stillness of the night. When we shift from royal courts and monasteries to the cottages of ordinary villagers, we enter a different dreamscape. Kings and queens might have dreamed of crowns, saints, and battles, but peasants, who made up the vast majority of medieval society, dreamed of the things that filled their daily lives: food, family, weather, work, and survival. For them, dreams were not distant symbols of empire, but intimate reflections of the hardships and hopes of everyday existence. Imagine a peasant family at the close of a long day. The men and women return from the fields, their backs sore from hours of labor, while children gather near the fire. Supper might be little more than bread, pottage, or cheese, with meat reserved for rare occasions. As the fire burns low, the family settles onto straw mattresses, sharing warmth against the chill of night. In these humble spaces, dreams unfolded, shaped by the rhythms of toil and the ever-present uncertainty of medieval rural life. Food often loomed large in the dreams of peasants. Hunger was never far away, especially in years of poor harvest or harsh winters. Dreams of bread, fruit, or overflowing granaries were common, and they carried powerful meaning. To dream of bread might signal that abundance was coming, or in times of famine, it might be a cruel reflection of the dreamer's longing. Grain was the lifeblood of the village, and so visions of wheat, barley, or rye were taken seriously. If a villager dreamed of rotting grain, neighbors might whisper that misfortune or pestilence was on the way. Weather, too, was a constant concern, and it shaped the dream world of peasants. A farmer might dream of endless rain flooding the fields, or of the sun blazing too hot, destroying the crops. These were not idle fancies. They reflected the fragility of life in an agricultural society. Dreams of storms or droughts could be interpreted as warnings from God, urging the community to pray for mercy. In some villages, if several people dreamed of the same weather pattern, it could spark collective anxiety and rituals to ward off disaster. Animals appeared frequently in the dreams of peasants, as they were central to daily life. A dream of a healthy cow might be seen as a sign of prosperity, while a sickly or dying animal could be a troubling omen. Horses, sheep, pigs, and chickens all carried their own symbolic weight, influenced by folklore and local tradition. Wild animals, wolves, boars, or bears, were feared both in waking life and in dreams, often representing danger or evil. For a shepherd who slept in the fields, dreaming of wolves was more than a symbol. It was an echo of a real threat that could destroy his livelihood overnight. Family relationships were another central theme. Dreams of children were especially poignant, given the high rates of infant mortality in the Middle Ages. A mother might dream of her child thriving and take it as a sign of God's blessing. Or she might dream of losing her child and wake with dread that the dream foretold tragedy. Fathers, too, dreamed of sons strong enough to plow fields or daughters marrying well, their hopes and fears seeping into the visions of the night. Dreams of deceased relatives were common, often interpreted as the souls of the dead reaching out to the living. For peasants, such dreams were a way to stay connected with loved ones lost to plague, war, or famine. Dream interpretation in villages was often a communal affair. Unlike kings who had bishops and scholars to advise them, peasants turned to neighbors, elders, or local wise women to make sense of their visions. Around the hearth or in the fields, people shared their dreams, listening for patterns and searching for meaning. If several villagers dreamed of fire or flood, it might be seen as a warning for the whole community. If one person dreamed of abundance, it could lift spirits in difficult times. Dreams were not private possessions. They belonged to the group, woven into the shared life of the village. Religious belief also shaped peasant dreams. Many villagers saw visions of saints, angels, or the Virgin Mary, which brought comfort and guidance. A dream of a saint might be taken as a call to pilgrimage or as reassurance that God had not forgotten the poor. At the same time, nightmares were feared as demonic attacks, and villagers relied on charms, prayers, or blessings to protect themselves. A priest might be asked to interpret troubling dreams or to bless a home where nightmares were common. Interestingly, some dream books, those collections of symbols and interpretations circulating in the Middle Ages, did filter down to the peasantry, though often in simplified or oral form. A literate villager or a traveling merchant might share snippets of dream lore, spreading ideas like, to dream of a fish means good fortune, or to dream of fire means danger. These fragments of learned tradition mingled with folk beliefs, creating a unique blend of interpretations in rural life. Dreams could even influence practical decisions. A farmer who dreamed of wolves might keep his flock closer the next day. A mother who dreamed of illness might seek out herbs for her child. A community that dreamed of bad weather might organize extra prayers at the parish church. In this way, dreams were not just idle stories. They shaped behavior, guiding choices in subtle but significant ways. At times, dreams were seen as glimpses of justice or injustice. If a villager dreamed of a wrong done to them, say, a neighbor stealing grain, it might spark suspicion or tension. Conversely, dreams could also offer comfort, showing images of wrongs being righted or of God rewarding the faithful. These visions reinforced the idea that life, though harsh, was overseen by a higher order, and that the poor were not forgotten in God's plan. Perhaps most touching is the way dreams gave peasants a space to imagine a better world. In sleep, the poor could dream of feasts, of lands rich with crops, of homes safe from war and plague. For people whose waking lives were often filled with hardship, dreams provided a temporary escape, a taste of abundance, joy, or peace that might otherwise be out of reach. Even if these dreams were bittersweet, they carried hope into the day. Of course, not every dream was taken seriously. Some were laughed off, shared with humor around the fire. A man who dreamed of chasing pigs might be teased for overeating before bed. A child who dreamed of flying might be told they had the imagination of a bird. Dreams could entertain as well as warn, offering moments of levity in difficult lives. In sum, the dream world of peasants was grounded in the soil, shaped by hunger, weather, family, and faith. It was a dream world less dramatic than that of kings, perhaps, but no less meaningful. If anything, it was closer to the heart of medieval life, revealing the hopes and fears of those who tilled the fields, carried water, and built the world from the ground up. As you drift into sleep, imagine yourself in a small thatched cottage, the air cool with the scent of smoke, the sound of animals shifting in the straw nearby. You close your eyes and dream of bread warm from the oven, of fields heavy with grain, of children laughing in the sunlight. For the medieval peasant, such a dream was more than a passing fancy. It was a vision of survival, of blessing, and of the fragile beauty of life. As we've seen, medieval people took dreams seriously, whether they came to kings, monks, or peasants. But how did they make sense of these visions? Beyond communal storytelling or clerical guidance, there was another, fascinating layer to dream culture: the dream manuals and symbol books that circulated throughout the Middle Ages. These texts offered a kind of roadmap for interpreting the mysteries of the night, turning private visions into something that could be read, studied, and understood. Dream books, as they were often called, were not uniquely medieval inventions. Their roots stretched back to antiquity, particularly to the dream lore of the Greeks and Romans. Works like Artemidorus Wonera Critica, a Greek text from the 2nd century, were still known in parts of medieval Europe, especially through the mediation of Arab scholars, who preserved and commented on such writings. By the 12th and 13th centuries, fragments of these classical traditions mingled with Christian thought and local folklore, creating uniquely medieval handbooks for understanding the dream world. These manuals typically listed symbols and offered concise interpretations. For example, to dream of water might mean abundance or cleansing. To dream of fire could signal anger, danger, or divine purification. To dream of animals might reveal inner desires or external threats. Entire sections were devoted to common themes: food, colors, numbers, weather, and even everyday tools. The underlying idea was that dreams spoke in a symbolic language, and the manuals provided the dictionary. Not everyone had access to these books, of course. Literacy was still limited, and manuscripts were expensive. But dream lore was often shared orally, with ideas traveling from clerics and literate merchants into villages, where they mingled with local traditions. A farmer might never hold a dream book himself, but he might hear from a neighbor that dreaming of snakes means enemies are near, or dreaming of a feast means illness is coming. Over time, these fragments of interpretation became part of everyday conversation, so that even the illiterate could carry a sense of symbolic meaning. Some of these manuals were surprisingly detailed. Surviving manuscripts show that they could run to dozens of pages, with careful divisions of topics. One medieval dream book might list interpretations alphabetically, while another might group them thematically. A dream of a lion, for example, could be read as a sign of courage, power, or a coming encounter with authority. A dream of milk might signal health or fertility. Dreams of ladders, bridges, or gates were often associated with transitions in life, whether spiritual or physical. These guides created a rich symbolic vocabulary that shaped how medieval people understood their nightly visions. Interestingly, dream manuals were not confined to Europe. Across the medieval Islamic world, dream interpretation was also a respected discipline, sometimes linked to medicine or philosophy. Scholars like Ibn Siryn wrote influential texts that spread widely. Through trade and cultural contact, some of these interpretations filtered into Europe, blending with Christian thought. Thus, when a medieval European consulted a dream book, they were often engaging with a tradition that stretched across cultures, connecting them with a much larger human fascination with dreams. In Christian Europe, however, dream manuals were sometimes viewed with suspicion. The Church maintained a cautious stance, warning that not all dreams were trustworthy. Some clerics worried that dream books encouraged superstition or bordered on divination, which was forbidden. Yet even within monasteries, dream interpretation persisted. Monks might keep records of dreams, consulting manuals when symbols seemed especially puzzling. In practice, the line between acceptable reflection and forbidden superstition was blurry, and dream books often slipped comfortably into the daily lives of people hungry for meaning. The symbolism in these manuals reveals a lot about medieval values and anxieties. Dreams of wealth, for example, were rarely interpreted in purely positive terms. To dream of gold could mean prosperity, but it could also warn of greed and corruption. Dreams of animals often reflected the roles those creatures played in society. Sheep signaled innocence or simplicity. Dogs could mean loyalty, but also danger if they bit, and cats, ambivalent creatures in medieval lore, might symbolize both independence and deceit. Dreams of journeys were interpreted as signs of spiritual progress, especially when roads, rivers, or mountains appeared. Some manuals gave special attention to bodily symbols. To dream of losing teeth, for example, was often read as a sign of death or misfortune in the family. To dream of blindness might signal betrayal or ignorance. These interpretations reflected both the fragility of life in the Middle Ages and the belief that the body and soul were deeply interconnected. A dream of sickness could be taken as a warning, not just of physical illness, but of spiritual failing. Colors, too, played a role in these guides. White was usually associated with purity, black with mourning or evil, red with passion or conflict, and green with fertility and life. Numbers carried symbolic meaning as well, often tied to biblical patterns. To dream of 3 objects might recall the Trinity. To dream of 7 could signify completeness or divine order. These associations gave dreams a structured grammar, turning them into texts that could be read and interpreted like scripture. Dream books were not always solemn. Some included playful or humorous entries, reflecting the lighter side of dream culture. To dream of eating too much might be a simple warning against gluttony. To dream of falling might be explained with a wry reminder to live more humbly. These lighter notes suggest that people did not always take dream interpretation with deadly seriousness. It could also provide entertainment, amusement, or moral instruction in everyday settings. One fascinating aspect of dream manuals is how they circulated beyond elite circles. Evidence suggests that they were sometimes copied into household books or included in collections alongside recipes, medical remedies, and charms. This shows that dream interpretation was part of the broader fabric of practical knowledge, sitting alongside the wisdom needed for cooking, healing, and farming. Dreams were not abstract curiosities. They were part of daily survival and understanding. It is worth imagining how a dream book might be used in practice. Picture a merchant in a medieval town, troubled by a dream of fire destroying his goods. The next day, he consults a local cleric or a literate friend who reads from a dream book. Fire can mean danger, but it can also mean purification or divine presence. The merchant weighs these meanings, unsure which applies, but he takes it seriously enough to store his goods more carefully or give alms for protection. In this way, the dream book does not provide certainty, but offers a framework for decision-making. Over time, these manuals shaped not only how people thought about their own dreams, but also how they listened to the dreams of others. When a neighbor shared a vision of snakes, the group could nod knowingly, drawing on a shared vocabulary of symbols. Dream books gave coherence to the unpredictable world of dreams, helping people find meaning in the chaos of the subconscious. As the Middle Ages progressed, dream books continued to circulate, though they gradually lost authority with the rise of scientific explanations of sleep. Yet their influence lingered. Even today, some of the symbols listed in medieval manuals remain familiar. To dream of teeth falling out is still seen by many as a bad omen, while dreams of flying still carry associations with freedom. In this way, the medieval fascination with symbols has seeped into modern culture, a quiet inheritance of a world where every dream was a message waiting to be read. So as you rest tonight, imagine yourself as a medieval dreamer, waking with a vivid vision. You walk by candlelight to a small book on the shelf, open its worn pages, and scan the entries. Bread means abundance. Storms mean trouble. A white bird means peace. The dream book whispers that your dream has meaning, that the symbols of your night are not random, but part of a larger language. And with that thought, you close the book, whisper a prayer, and drift once more into the darkness of sleep. Animals filled the medieval world, not only in barns and fields, but also in the imagination. They were companions, workers, threats, and symbols, and naturally, they prowled the landscapes of dreams as well. To the medieval dreamer, animals were not random figures of the subconscious, but messengers, each carrying meaning. Wolves, horses, birds, and countless other creatures took on rich symbolic roles in the medieval mind. and their presence in dreams was often interpreted with great seriousness. Let us begin with the wolf, a creature that haunted both forests and imaginations. In daily life, wolves were feared predators, capable of raiding flocks and leaving devastation behind. Their cries in the night reminded villagers of the fragility of their livelihood. So when wolves appeared in dreams, they carried layers of meaning. A dream of being chased by wolves might signify enemies closing in, greed lurking at the door, or the presence of the devil himself. The wolf was often linked to sin, representing rapacity and destruction. In Christian sermons, wolves symbolized false teachers who led the faithful astray, so a dream of wolves could be read as a warning against deceit. Yet not all wolf dreams were negative. Sometimes the beast was interpreted as a test of courage, a challenge to be faced and overcome. Horses occupied a very different place in medieval dreams. They were noble animals, essential for transportation, farming, and war. For knights, the horse was more than a tool. It was a companion in battle, a symbol of status, and a reflection of their own power. To dream of a horse could therefore be uplifting, suggesting strength, honor, or advancement. A well-groomed, strong horse was a good omen, often linked to prosperity or victory. Conversely, to dream of a weak, sickly, or dying horse could mean loss of wealth, betrayal in friendship, or the fading of strength. Color mattered too. A white horse might signify purity or divine favor, while a black horse could represent mystery, mourning, or death. Horses in dreams were also tied to journeys, both physical and spiritual. A galloping horse could symbolize forward momentum in life, while a stumbling one might be a warning of obstacles ahead. Birds brought yet another dimension to medieval dreamscapes. They were creatures of the sky, associated with freedom, communication, and sometimes the soul itself. In medieval lore, the flight of birds could be read as omens, so their appearance in dreams carried weight. A dream of a dove often signified peace, purity, or the presence of the Holy Spirit. Crows and ravens, by contrast, were linked to death, battlefields, and ill fortune. To dream of a flock of birds might be interpreted as gossip spreading or as news coming from afar. The sound of birds in dreams could signal both joy and warning, depending on the species. Because medieval people lived so closely with nature, they recognized these creatures instantly, and their dream meanings felt deeply intuitive. Beyond these three wolves, horses, and birds, countless other animals populated medieval dreams. Cows and sheep, central to the economy, often represented prosperity, innocence, or community. Cats, with their elusive independence, were seen as ambiguous symbols, sometimes protectors of the home, sometimes linked to witchcraft or deceit. Dogs were similarly double-edged. A faithful dog in a dream could signify loyalty and protection, while a snarling or biting dog suggested betrayal or danger. Snakes carried heavy symbolic weight, drawing directly from the story of Eden. To dream of a snake could mean temptation, treachery, or hidden enemies. Yet snakes could also represent healing, echoing their role in medical symbolism. Fish appeared often as well, sometimes as signs of abundance, other times as reminders of Christ, who is symbolized by the ichthys. Dreams of catching fish might promise good fortune, while losing fish could foreshadow disappointment. What's striking is how the meanings of animals in dreams mirrored medieval life. The creatures that were most present in daily existence, livestock, predators hunting animals, were also the ones that appeared most frequently in dreams and in the dream manuals. People interpreted them not as abstract symbols, but as deeply familiar presences, charged with both practical and spiritual meaning. In some cases, animals in dreams were connected to moral lessons. A dream of being pursued by wild beasts might be explained as the soul pursued by sin. A dream of taming an animal could be interpreted as conquering temptation. Preachers sometimes used dream imagery in sermons, reminding listeners that even in sleep, God might send symbols to guide them. If a person dreamed of a lion, for example, it could be a warning to remain steadfast in faith, or conversely, an encouragement that God's strength was with them. Animals also appeared in dreams as companions or guides. In certain visions recorded by monks, animals led dreamers to hidden treasures, holy places, or revelations. Birds might carry messages from heaven. A faithful dog might guide a dreamer through danger. These motifs blended Christian symbolism with older folk traditions, creating a rich tapestry of animal meanings. Of course, not all animals were viewed in a sacred light. Some were associated with witchcraft and malice. Cats, toads, and bats, if they appeared in dreams, could stir suspicion of sorcery. In a world where accusations of witchcraft were never far away, a troubling animal dream might be enough to inspire fear of neighbors or to prompt protective rituals. Dream books often devoted entire sections to animals, offering line after line of interpretation. To dream of bees might mean hard work and community. To dream of being stung might mean betrayal. To dream of a pig eating might mean gluttony. To dream of slaughtering a pig might signal profit. These interpretations circulated widely, making animals one of the most consistent categories in medieval dream lore. It is easy to imagine villagers sharing these interpretations with one another. A shepherd might tell of dreaming about wolves, and the others would nod, understanding the danger it implied. A farmer might dream of chickens laying many eggs, and the village would take it as a sign of abundance. These shared readings gave dreams social weight, strengthening the bond between people and reinforcing the symbolic power of the animals they lived among. At the same time, animals in dreams provided comfort. A mother who dreamed of a lamb might see it as a sign that her child was protected. A knight who dreamed of a strong steed might take courage for the battles ahead. Dreams were not always warnings. They could also be reassurances, carrying hope and encouragement into the day. In literature, too, animals populated dream visions. Medieval poets often used animal imagery in their allegorical dream visions, blending personal experience with moral and spiritual lessons. A dreamer might be guided by a bird to a symbolic garden, or chased by wolves that represented human vices. These literary works reflected the same cultural vocabulary of animal symbolism, showing how deeply it had permeated both popular and learned traditions. So as you rest tonight, picture yourself as a medieval dreamer lying in a quiet cottage, the sounds of animals outside blending into the stillness of night. You drift into sleep and see a wolf in the forest, a horse galloping across a field, or a bird soaring high into the sky. You awaken with the sense that these creatures have brought you messages that the world of nature and the world of the spirit have met in your dreams. For the medieval mind, these were not idle images. They were signs, lessons, and reminders that even in sleep, creation spoke. Few subjects stirred as much longing and anxiety in the medieval world as wealth. Gold, silver, coins, and treasure shaped the lives of both nobles and peasants, though in vastly different ways. It is no surprise, then, that dreams of wealth and fortune were common across medieval Europe. Whether one lived in a castle or a village cottage, the image of riches appearing in the dream world carried immense symbolic weight. For peasants, dreams of wealth often reflected desires that were rarely fulfilled in waking life. To dream of coins spilling from one's hands, or of fields rich with crops, could feel like a tantalizing promise of relief from poverty. Hunger and toil were constants, and a dream of abundance was not simply fantasy. It was a glimpse of what survival might feel like without constant struggle. Families who dreamed of wealth might wake with hope that fortune was turning in their favor, or with sorrow that such abundance existed only in the mind's eye. Merchants and townsfolk, on the other hand, approached dreams of wealth with both anticipation and caution. For them, riches were closer at hand, tied to the success of trade, crafts, or investments. A merchant who dreamed of gold coins might interpret it as a sign of profitable deals to come. Yet the same dream could also be read as a warning against greed or dishonesty. Dream manuals often carried these dual meanings, reminding readers that riches could be both a blessing and a trap. To dream of finding treasure might signify opportunity, but to dream of losing it was a clear warning of misfortune. In noble courts, dreams of wealth often took on a grander scale. Kings and lords dreamed of overflowing treasuries, jewels, or golden crowns. These visions could be interpreted as signs of divine favor, affirming their rule and the prosperity of their realm. But such dreams could also stir unease. A crown crumbling in a dream might suggest instability or loss of power. Treasure slipping away might signify rebellion, betrayal, or looming war. For rulers, dreams of wealth were never just personal. They were bound up with the fate of kingdoms. Dream books devoted many entries to the symbolism of wealth. To dream of gold was usually a double-edged sign. It could mean abundance and prosperity, but also greed, corruption, and spiritual danger. Silver, by contrast, was often linked with clarity, honesty, or truth. Coins could represent profit, but they could also symbolize worry, especially if the coins in the dream were few or counterfeit. Gems and jewels were interpreted as signs of hidden wisdom or divine blessings, particularly when associated with light. Dreamers were advised to look carefully at the context. Treasure discovered in the earth might signal God's reward, but treasure locked away or stolen might signify looming hardship. Food, too, could symbolize wealth in dreams, particularly for peasants. A dream of tables laden with bread, meat, and wine was as powerful as a dream of gold. In a world where famine was never far away, food itself was fortune. Dreamers often interpreted such visions as promises of abundance or divine provision. But excessive feasts in dreams could also be warnings against gluttony or excess, echoing the moral teachings of the Church. One fascinating aspect of wealth in dreams was its connection to morality. Medieval preachers often reminded their congregations that earthly riches were fleeting, and that dreams of gold or treasure might be tests from God. A man who dreamed of sudden wealth was advised not to cling to it, but to give alms, lest greed take root in his soul. Stories circulated of villagers who dreamed of finding treasure, only to discover nothing in the waking world. Such tales reinforced the lesson that dreams of wealth were not always to be trusted, and that true riches lay in spiritual devotion. Yet dreams of fortune were not purely warnings. Sometimes they inspired action. A farmer who dreamed of buried treasure might dig in his field, hoping to discover hidden coins. A merchant who dreamed of abundance might take it as encouragement to pursue a risky deal. Chronicles even record cases where treasure was discovered after dreams, reinforcing the belief that dreams could reveal divine gifts. Whether by coincidence or design, such stories spread quickly, convincing communities that dreams could truly alter their fortunes. At the same time, losing wealth in dreams was feared as a bad omen. A dream of stolen coins, broken chests, or empty tables might be seen as a warning of financial disaster. For peasants, such visions could spark dread that the coming harvest would fail. For merchants, they might inspire caution in trade. For rulers, they were ominous signs of rebellion or theft within their courts. The loss of wealth in a dream reminded medieval people of how fragile prosperity could be, and how easily it could slip away. Interestingly, dreams of wealth often intertwined with dreams of sin. Gold could symbolize pride, jewels vanity, and feasts gluttony. The Church's warnings against greed colored the interpretation of such dreams, urging believers to view riches not as blessings but as temptations. This tension between desire and morality gave wealth dreams their intensity. They were as much about the state of the soul as about the state of the purse. Dreams of fortune could also carry symbolic meanings tied to the afterlife. Some believed that to dream of gold was to glimpse heavenly treasures promised to the faithful. Others warned that to dream of riches was to be reminded of the fleeting nature of earthly life, and that only in heaven were true riches secure. This spiritual layer added depth to the dream world, blending earthly desires with eternal concerns. Folklore preserved countless stories of ordinary people dreaming of wealth. A villager might tell of dreaming of a golden cup, only to find one buried near the churchyard. Another might dream of silver coins under a tree and dig fruitlessly for days. Whether or not treasure was found, the dream itself became a story shared in the community, fueling hope, envy, or amusement. In this way, dreams of wealth shaped not only the dreamer's imagination, but also the collective spirit of villages and towns. Literature, too, made use of such dreams. Poets and storytellers often depicted characters dreaming of riches, only to learn lessons about vanity, greed, or the fleeting nature of life. A knight might dream of a jewel-encrusted crown, only to awaken to the reality of his poverty. A poor man might dream of wealth and interpret it as God's promise, only to find that true riches lay in virtue rather than gold. These stories reflected the ambivalence of medieval attitudes toward wealth. It was desirable, yet dangerous. A blessing, yet a temptation. For us today, wealth dreams may seem simple reflections of desire, but in the Middle Ages, they were woven into a larger web of morality, community, and fate. To dream of gold was to glimpse not just coins, but the soul as balance between greed and grace. To dream of treasure was to feel the tension between hope and fear, between abundance and loss. So as you drift to sleep, imagine yourself as a medieval dreamer. You close your eyes and see coins glittering in the torchlight, jewels scattered across a table, or fields overflowing with grain. You wake with your heart pounding, unsure whether the dream was a promise of fortune or a warning of temptation. For the medieval mind, such uncertainty was the very essence of dreams' mysteries that could reveal the will of God, test the soul, or stir the deepest longings of the heart. Love and marriage, though often idealized in songs and stories, were also some of the most practical and emotionally charged concerns of the Middle Ages. Families relied on marriages to secure alliances. Peasants depended on them for stability, and poets celebrated or mourned the mysteries of love. It is no wonder, then, that these themes frequently appeared in dreams. For medieval dreamers, visions of courtship, weddings, and intimacy were not idle fantasies. They were messages, warnings, and sometimes glimpses into the deepest hopes and fears of the heart. Marriage in the Middle Ages was rarely just about romance. For nobles, it was a matter of politics, a union that could secure land, peace, or power. For peasants, it was the foundation of daily life, the joining of two people who would work side by side to survive. Love certainly played a role, sometimes more than others, but whether arranged or chosen, marriage carried immense weight. Dreams about love and marriage reflected this importance, blending emotion, beauty, and faith. For unmarried young people, dreams of love were often seen as signs of destiny. A maiden who dreamed of a handsome figure offering her a flower might believe she had glimpsed her future husband. A young man who dreamed of dancing with a woman might interpret it as a sign of courtship soon to come. These visions were rarely dismissed as mere fancy. Families, friends, and even village elders sometimes listened carefully to such dreams, interpreting them as hints of what was to come. Dream books offered specific interpretations of love dreams. To dream of holding hands was a sign of loyalty or a forthcoming union. To dream of kissing could mean affection, but could also warn of betrayal, depending on the context. Weddings and dreams were often double-edged. A joyful ceremony might predict happiness, but sometimes it was read as an omen of death, since marriage and funeral rites shared symbolic similarities in medieval thought. Rings were especially significant. To dream of a ring slipping off the finger could be a troubling sign of broken promises or lost love. To dream of receiving a ring, on the other hand, was nearly always interpreted as a good omen of marriage, partnership, or trust. Erotic dreams added another layer of complexity. Medieval people believed that the devil often used such visions to tempt the soul. Monks, nuns, and lay people alike worried about sinful desires taking root in the night. Confessors sometimes heard people describe troubling dreams of passion, which were treated as signs of vulnerability to temptation. Yet not all erotic dreams were condemned. In the context of marriage, they could be seen as natural, even affirming the bond between husband and wife. The distinction lay in intent and circumstance. Dreams that glorified lust outside of marriage were seen as dangerous, while those within marriage could be interpreted more gently. Romantic dreams were also influenced by the popular culture of courtly love. In the great castles of Europe, poets and troubadours sang of knights devoted to unattainable ladies, their passion expressed through longing glances, secret letters, and noble deeds. Dreams often reflected this imagery. A knight might dream of serving a lady in a tournament, or a woman might dream of receiving a knight's pledge beneath a flowering tree. These visions were understood as extensions of the ideals of chivalry, where love was as much about honor and devotion as about physical desire. Marriage dreams also carried heavy symbolic weight for women, whose lives were often defined by their marital status. A young woman dreaming of a wedding might feel excitement, but also anxiety, for marriage could mean leaving her family, bearing children, and taking on immense responsibilities. A widow dreaming of her deceased husband might interpret it as a message of comfort or a reminder of loneliness. For men, dreams of marriage often reflected their duties as providers and protectors, carrying the weight of responsibility for a household. Community interpretations of marriage dreams were common. Villagers might gossip if a young woman reported dreaming of a certain man, suggesting that the two were destined to wed. Parents might encourage or discourage suitors based on such visions. While not every dream dictated action, they shaped the way people thought about relationships, hinting at divine will or hidden desires. Some dream accounts tell of marriages foretold by visions. Chronicles and miracle stories describe young people who dreamed of saints arranging their marriages, or of holy figures blessing their unions. These tales reinforced the idea that marriage was not merely a social contract, but a sacred covenant overseen by heaven. A dream of the Virgin Mary blessing a couple could inspire confidence that their union was divinely favored. Yet dreams of marriage were not always comforting. Sometimes they carried warnings of sorrow. A bride dreaming of her wedding dress torn or soiled might fear misfortune. A groom dreaming of his bride turning into a stranger could take it as a sign of betrayal or loss. In some traditions, dreaming of one's own wedding was believed to foreshadow death, since both events involved ceremonial clothing, candles, and solemn vows. These darker interpretations remind us that medieval people lived with a constant awareness of mortality, and dreams of union could easily shift into dreams of parting. Dreams of love and marriage also provided moral lessons. Preachers often warned that to dream of forbidden love was a sign of the soul straying from God's path. Adulterers' dreams were treated as serious warnings, encouraging confession and penance. In contrast, dreams of faithful, holy unions were praised as signs of virtue. In this way, love dreams were moralized, becoming not only personal visions, but also spiritual tests. Literature of the time echoed these themes. In Chaucer's dream vision poems, love often appeared as both delight and torment, a force that shaped destinies and tested characters. Dreams of lovers meeting in gardens or of marriages celebrated in dream castles blended romantic fantasy with moral allegory. Readers recognized their own hopes and fears in these stories, seeing dreams as both personal and universal. For peasants, dreams of love and marriage were perhaps simpler, but no less important. A young woman might dream of her betrothed returning safely from war and wake with renewed faith. A man might dream of a happy family gathered at table, a vision of stability in a precarious world. Such dreams offered comfort, reassurance, and sometimes the strength to endure hardship. It is easy to imagine how such dreams might be shared. At dawn, a maiden might whisper to her friend that she dreamed of a handsome man giving her a flower. The friend would giggle, suggesting that marriage was near. A widow might tell her children of dreaming of their father, framing it as proof that he watched over them still. A husband and wife might laugh together over a strange dream of abundance, interpreting it as a sign of blessing. In every case, dreams of love and marriage tied individuals closer to their families and communities. So as you drift toward rest, imagine yourself as a medieval dreamer, lying in a quiet chamber lit only by moonlight. You close your eyes and see yourself walking hand in hand with a beloved figure, or standing before an altar in a joyful wedding procession. Perhaps the dream fills you with peace, or perhaps it stirs unease. Either way, you awaken knowing that love and marriage are more than earthly matters. They are woven into the dream world, carrying messages of hope, warning, and destiny. Among the many dreams recorded and retold in the Middle Ages, some of the most powerful and comforting were those of heaven. In a world where life was filled with hardship, disease, and uncertainty, the thought of paradise was deeply appealing. Dreams offered glimpses of that promised land, reassuring believers that beyond the struggles of this world lay eternal joy. These visions were cherished not only by individuals, but also by entire communities, for they strengthened faith, offered hope, and reminded the faithful of God's presence in their lives. When medieval people spoke of heaven, they often used images drawn from Scripture: radiant gardens, shining cities, music that never ceased, and light that never faded. These were the images that surfaced in dreams. A peasant might dream of walking through a field where crops never failed. A monk might see himself in a choir of angels, singing praises without end. A noblewoman might dream of a banquet where no one was excluded, where peace and abundance flowed without fear of loss. Such dreams carried a sweetness that lingered upon waking, a sense that heaven itself had brushed against the soul. Stories of heavenly visions filled medieval chronicles and saints' lives. Monks in particular often recorded dreams of paradise, sometimes describing them in exquisite detail. One might dream of a brilliant staircase reaching into the sky, angels ascending and descending as in the story of Jacob's ladder. Another might dream of a shining river, its waters sparkling with divine light. These visions were not dismissed as mere fantasies. They were treated as signs of holiness, moments when God had chosen to reveal his mercy to the dreamer. Visions of heaven were not confined to the cloister. Ordinary villagers also reported them. A farmer might tell of dreaming of green meadows filled with lambs, and his neighbors would nod, seeing in it a reflection of peace and safety. A mother grieving her lost child might dream of seeing the little one in radiant clothing, playing joyfully among angels. Such dreams brought deep comfort, assuring the bereaved that their loved ones were safe in God's care. These stories spread quickly, offering hope not only to the dreamer, but to the entire community. Dream books, too, included heavenly imagery. To dream of light was almost always interpreted as a sign of divine blessing. To dream of gardens, flowers, or clear water suggested peace and spiritual health. To see angels in dreams was taken as proof of protection, guidance, or forgiveness. While dream manuals often included warnings about false visions, the overall tone was hopeful when it came to heavenly symbols. For a medieval dreamer, such images were not to be ignored. They were treasures of the night. Music often played a role in heavenly dreams. Many accounts describe choirs of angels singing harmonies too beautiful to be described. To hear such music in a dream was thought to be a foretaste of the eternal joy awaiting the faithful. Medieval theology emphasized the role of music in heaven, and dreamers who reported such sounds were often believed to have received a rare and blessed gift. Even illiterate peasants, who may never have heard elaborate church choirs, spoke of hearing heavenly songs in their dreams, as though the music of paradise could reach any soul. Light was another common element. Dreams of blinding radiance, of suns that did not burn, or of candles that never dimmed, were seen as reflections of God's presence. In sermons, preachers reminded listeners that Christ was the light of the world, and so light in dreams was often interpreted as his nearness. Some accounts describe dreamers so overwhelmed by the brightness of heavenly visions that they awoke in tears, unable to describe what they had seen. Heavenly dreams also carried moral messages. To glimpse paradise in sleep was not only comforting, but also instructive. Dreamers often awoke resolved to live more virtuously, to give alms, or to pray more diligently. In this way, visions of heaven reinforced the teachings of the Church, urging believers to remain steadfast. A knight who dreamed of shining crowns might redouble his vows of loyalty. A merchant who dreamed of abundant gardens might be inspired to give generously, recognizing that earthly wealth was fleeting compared to eternal reward. For those near death, heavenly dreams were especially powerful. Chronicles tell of sick or dying people who dreamed of angels guiding them upward, or of shining gates opening before them. Families often took these dreams as signs that the soul was ready to depart, that the person suffering would soon give way to joy. Such dreams brought comfort at the bedside, easing the fears of both the dying and their loved ones. Even rulers valued heavenly dreams. Some kings and queens claimed to have seen visions of paradise, using them as proof of their divine favor. A ruler who dreamed of a golden throne surrounded by light might take it as confirmation that his reign was just. Chroniclers recorded such stories with reverence, reminding readers that even the highest of rulers longed for the peace of heaven. In literature, dream visions of heaven were often used as allegories. Poets described dreamers wandering through radiant landscapes, meeting figures who embodied virtues like faith, hope, or charity. These dream visions blended personal longing with moral instruction, showing that the path to heaven was paved with right living. Readers were meant to reflect on their own lives, inspired by the dreamer's journey toward paradise. What made heavenly dreams so powerful was their contrast with the difficulties of daily life. In a world marked by famine, plague, and war, to dream of a place free from suffering was to taste hope. These dreams reminded people that the hardships of earth were temporary and that a better home awaited them. They lifted spirits, strengthened endurance, and gave meaning to suffering. For many medieval dreamers, a single heavenly vision could carry them through weeks or even years of hardship. Of course, not every heavenly dream was straightforward. Some dreamers described being shown paradise, but then turned away as though reminded that they were not yet ready. These visions carried a stern edge, urging repentance and humility. Others dreamed of seeing loved ones in heaven while remaining outside themselves, a bittersweet reminder that the journey was not yet complete. These mixed dreams reflected the tension of medieval faith, hope in God's mercy, but awareness of the need for preparation and penance. Still, the overall tone of heavenly dreams was one of comfort. They were reminders that God's love reached beyond the walls of churches and monasteries, touching people in their most vulnerable hours of sleep. Whether experienced by monks, peasants, or nobles, such visions reassured dreamers that the promises of faith were real, and that the soul was destined for more than the struggles of earth. So, as you prepare to rest, imagine yourself as a medieval dreamer. You close your eyes and see a garden brighter than the sun, hear music sweeter than any choir, and feel peace beyond description. Perhaps you walk with loved ones among flowers that never wither, or sit at a banquet where no one goes hungry. You awaken, heart filled with quiet joy, knowing that even in the darkest times, heaven is near. For medieval dreamers, such visions were more than dreams, they were glimpses of eternity. If dreams of heaven offered comfort and reassurance, their dark counterpart dreams of hell brought terror and trembling. For people in the Middle Ages, hell was not an abstract concept, but a vivid and ever-present reality. Preachers described its torments in detail. Artists painted its flames across church walls, and monks copied texts that warned of its horrors. When medieval men and women dreamed of hell, they believed they had glimpsed not fantasy, but a dreadful truth. These visions were often treated as divine warnings, urging repentance and moral reform. The imagery of hell in dreams was powerful because it was already so deeply embedded in medieval imagination. Sermons told of devils with claws and horns, of fire that never ceased, and of sinners punished in grotesque ways. Mystery plays performed in villages brought these images to life, with actors dressed as demons dragging souls into mock pits of fire. Church murals, particularly on the Last Judgment, depicted damned souls screaming in flames. With such images surrounding them daily, it is no wonder that dreamers found themselves haunted by hellish visions in their sleep. One common theme in these dreams was fire. To dream of flames consuming the body, or of burning cities and fields, was often interpreted as a warning of sin. Fire was the dominant image of hell, a symbol not only of pain, but of eternal separation from God. Dreamers might awaken sweating, convinced that they had felt the heat of damnation itself. Some chroniclers recorded stories of people who dreamed of burning in hell, and immediately sought confession, desperate to cleanse their souls. Demons were another frequent presence in such visions. In dreams, they appeared as grotesque figures with wings, tails, or animal-like faces, tormenting the dreamer or dragging them away. These were not seen as random images, but as real spiritual threats. To encounter demons in dreams was to confront the reality of temptation and sin. People believed that such visions revealed the true enemies of the soul, reminding them to resist temptation in waking life. Many dreamers also reported seeing punishments tailored to specific sins. A greedy man might dream of being forced to swallow molten gold. A liar might see themselves with their tongue torn out. A glutton might be starved, surrounded by unreachable food. These dreams echoed the moral teaching of the time, where hell was imagined as a place of poetic justice, each sinner punished in a way that mirrored their sins. For medieval people, such visions carried not only fear, but also lessons. Avoid sin or suffer the consequences. Monastic writings contain numerous accounts of hellish dreams. Monks, striving for purity, often experienced terrifying visions that they interpreted as spiritual battles. Some dreamed of being judged and condemned, others of wandering through fiery pits. These accounts were preserved as cautionary tales, reminding readers that even the most devout were vulnerable to sin and needed constant vigilance. Saints' lives sometimes included visions of hell as well, often contrasting with heavenly dreams. A saint might be shown the horrors of the damned before being led to paradise, underscoring the choice between two eternal paths. Dream books included entries on hellish imagery too, though often in less explicit terms. To dream of darkness, for instance, might signal despair or spiritual danger. To dream of chains suggested bondage to sin. To see monstrous figures might mean betrayal or evil at work in the community. These interpretations gave dreamers a way to make sense of frightening visions, though they often reinforced the idea that such dreams were warnings, not meaningless fears. Visions of hell also carried a communal function. If a villager dreamed of neighbors burning in hell, it might spark gossip, suspicion, or even accusations of sinfulness. Conversely, if a respected figure dreamed of their own damnation, it could inspire humility, as they confessed openly and warned others to repent. Dreams of hell were thus not only private experiences, but also public events, shaping behavior in families, villages, and monasteries. Artists and writers drew inspiration from these visions. Medieval poems sometimes included dream sequences in which the narrator was dragged into the underworld, witnessing torments before awakening to reform their life. Such literary dreams echoed real accounts, blurring the line between imaginative allegory and genuine belief. Dante's Divine Comedy, though an Italian Renaissance masterpiece, was shaped by the same medieval fascination with hellish visions, describing punishments in elaborate, symbolic detail. For rulers, dreams of hell were particularly troubling. Chronicles tell of kings who dreamed of being cast into flames, their crowns melting away, their bodies tormented by demons. Such visions were interpreted as signs that their rule was unjust or their souls in peril. Some rulers responded by building churches, giving alms, or reforming their courts, hoping to avert the punishment they had seen. In this way, dreams of hell could have real political consequences, influencing decisions at the highest levels of power. Not all hellish dreams were terrifying in the same way. Some were more symbolic, showing landscapes of desolation, wastelands without light, cold instead of fire, silence instead of music. These dreams reflected another medieval fear, separation from God, which was considered the true essence of damnation. To dream of being alone in darkness could be as frightening as visions of fire, for it suggested eternal abandonment, the loss of hope itself. Nightmares of hell often blurred with the experience of demonic visitations. A dreamer might feel pressed down in bed, unable to move, convinced that demons were seizing them. Such experiences, now understood as sleep paralysis, were interpreted as glimpses of hell's torments. The sense of suffocation, fear, and helplessness felt like punishment in itself, convincing many that they had momentarily entered the realm of the damned. Yet, even in their terror, hellish dreams served a purpose. They reinforced the urgency of faith, the need for confession, prayer, and righteous living. Preachers sometimes retold stories of such visions to stir their congregations, reminding listeners that hell was real and could be glimpsed even in sleep. Dreams of hell became sermons of the night, as powerful as any spoken from the pulpit. For the medieval dreamer, waking from a vision of hell was both dreadful and relieving. The fear lingered, but so did gratitude for the chance to change. A villager might run to the parish priest at dawn, eager to confess sins. A monk might fast or pray with renewed devotion. A ruler might soften his judgments or give alms to the poor. These dreams were not wasted. They were catalysts for transformation. So as you imagine drifting into sleep in the Middle Ages, picture yourself in a dark chamber. The fire has gone out, shadows creep across the walls, and you fall into uneasy slumber. Suddenly, flames rise around you, demons jeer, and cries of the damned echo in your ears. You struggle, terrified, until at last you awaken in your bed, safe but shaken. For the medieval mind, such a vision was not meaningless. It was a warning, a glimpse of what might await without repentance. Dreams of hell were grim, but they carried hope too, the chance to turn back, to choose the path that led not to flames, but to paradise. Death was a constant presence in the Middle Ages. Plagues swept through villages, wars ravaged the land, and life expectancy was short by modern standards. Few people reached old age, and nearly everyone experienced the loss of loved ones early in life. It is no wonder, then, that dreams of death and the afterlife were among the most vivid and meaningful of all medieval visions. These dreams were not simply about fear. They carried warnings, offered comfort, and reflected the deep concern with what lay beyond the grave. Dreams of death often began with familiar images: a graveyard, a funeral procession, or a skeletal figure approaching in silence. Sometimes the dreamer saw themselves dying, sometimes a loved one, and sometimes strangers whose fates carried symbolic weight. Unlike today, when death is often kept at a distance, medieval people lived closely with it, and dreams reflected that intimacy. A coffin scene in a dream might be read as a warning of illness. A tolling bell could suggest that someone in the village would soon pass. In communities where survival was fragile, such dreams were rarely ignored. One striking element of medieval death dreams was their connection to symbolism. To dream of teeth falling out was widely believed to predict a death in the family. To dream of black clothing suggested mourning. Dreams of withered trees, fading flowers, or extinguished candles all carried associations with mortality. These symbols were reinforced in sermons and dream manuals, making them part of a shared vocabulary. When someone dreamed of these images, they They could easily be interpreted by neighbors, family, or priests as messages about death. But not all death dreams were frightening. Many people reported seeing deceased loved ones in their dreams, often in peaceful or comforting forms. A mother might dream of her child, smiling in radiant clothing. A widow might see her husband walking calmly through a meadow. Such visions were interpreted as reassurances from the afterlife, proof that the dead were safe and cared for. In a time when grief was heavy and constant, these dreams offered solace, keeping bonds between the living and the dead alive. At the same time, some dreams of the dead carried warnings. It was believed that souls in purgatory could appear in dreams, asking for prayers or alms to speed their passage into heaven. Stories circulated of villagers who dreamed of the dead, begging for masses to be said, and when the requests were granted, the souls later appeared again, this time in peace. Such dreams reinforced the idea that the boundary between living and dead was thin, and that the living could aid the departed through devotion. Monks and clerics recorded many accounts of death dreams. Some described visions of their own judgment, standing before Christ or angels who weighed their deeds. Others told of walking through cemeteries or seeing rivers that separated the living from the dead. These visions were not dismissed as nightmares, but taken as opportunities for reflection. They reminded dreamers to live piously, to prepare for the inevitable end. In monasteries, where the contemplation of death was part of spiritual discipline, such dreams were sometimes embraced as gifts from God. Dreams of death also touched the lives of rulers and nobles. Chronicles tell of kings who dreamed of their own demise, sometimes just days before it occurred. These accounts were written with solemn weight, as though to show that even the powerful could not escape death's approach. In some cases, dreams of death influenced political decisions. A ruler who dreamed of his downfall might change his plans, or order new prayers for protection. Death dreams thus became part of the history of courts and kingdoms. Dream books gave detailed interpretations of death-related dreams. To dream of dying oneself did not always mean physical death. It could be read as a sign of transformation, a new beginning, or spiritual rebirth. To dream of others dying might mean change in relationships or fortunes. But the manuals also included blunt warnings. Funerals in dreams could foreshadow real funerals. Graves could mean loss. These entries reflected the medieval tension between fear of death and hope for eternal life. Literature often explored death dreams as well. Poets used dream visions to depict journeys through realms of the dead, guiding dreamers through allegories of mortality and salvation. Chaucer's Book of the Duchess, for example, begins with the narrator reading about death and then dreaming of meeting a grieving knight. Such works showed that dreams of death were not only private experiences, but also powerful storytelling tools, helping audiences reflect on universal themes of loss and hope. Communities took death dreams seriously. If several villagers dreamed of illness or death, it could spark collective anxiety, especially in times of plague. Families sometimes altered their behavior based on dreams, avoiding travel, delaying work, or offering prayers for protection. Death dreams were woven into the rhythms of daily life, influencing choices and reinforcing the belief that God communicated through the night. One of the most haunting aspects of medieval death dreams was their connection to the afterlife. To dream of heaven was joyous, but to dream of hell was terrifying. Many death dreams hovered in between, showing images of purgatory, souls climbing mountains, suffering in flames, or waiting in shadow. These visions were interpreted as glimpses of the journey every soul must make. They reinforced the urgency of prayer, confession, and good works, for no one wished to linger in suffering after death. For some, dreams of death carried peace. A person might dream of lying down and rising into light, or of passing through a door into a radiant garden. Such visions gave hope that death was not an end, but a passage. Families who heard of these dreams often took comfort, believing that their loved one would die well, with faith and grace. Others, however, woke shaken. Dreams of skeletons, corpses, or graveyards were disturbing reminders of the body's decay. In an age when death was visible, bodies laid out at home, burials in churchyards just outside the village, these dreams reinforced the reality of mortality. They reminded dreamers of their own fragility and the need to prepare spiritually. Yet even in their fear, medieval people found meaning in death dreams. They were not seen as random or meaningless, but as part of God's communication with humanity. A dream of death could be a warning, a comfort, or a lesson. It could strengthen faith, encourage charity, or inspire repentance. In this way, death dreams were as much about life as they were about dying. So, as you imagine yourself drifting into sleep in a medieval cottage, picture the stillness of night, the distant tolling of a church bell, the weight of mortality pressing softly on the soul. In your dream, perhaps you walk through a quiet graveyard or see a departed loved one smiling from afar. You awaken with a mix of fear and peace, reminded that life is brief, but that beyond its end lies the mystery of eternity. For medieval dreamers, death dreams were never just about endings. They were glimpses of the journey yet to come. If dreams were powerful for villagers and kings alike, they carried special significance within the walls of monasteries. Monks and nuns dedicated their lives to prayer, study, and discipline, and the dream world was often viewed as another realm in which spiritual struggles played out. Within these cloisters, dreams were not merely personal experiences. They were opportunities for divine instruction, warnings against temptation, or even glimpses of eternity. Monastic life was built around structure. The day was divided into canonical hours of prayer, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. These rhythms of waking and sleeping meant that monks and nuns often experienced dreams at unusual times. Rising in the middle of the night for matins, and returning to their beds, created opportunities for dreams to unfold between waking and prayer. These interrupted patterns of rest gave dreams a special aura, as though they were woven into the very fabric of devotion. Within monastic communities, dreams were often shared and discussed. If a monk dreamed of a vision that seemed divine, he might recount it to his abbot. Nuns sometimes recorded their dreams in spiritual writings, interpreting them as messages from God. Such accounts could become part of the community's collective memory, shaping its sense of purpose and reinforcing the belief that the cloister was a space where heaven and earth touched. Not all monastic dreams were comforting. Monks frequently wrote of being tormented in sleep by visions of demons, lust, or despair. These nightmares were interpreted as spiritual tests, challenges that revealed the soul's weaknesses. A monk who dreamed of indulgence in food or drink might see it as a reminder to fast more strictly. A nun who dreamed of worldly pleasures might interpret it as a warning against distraction from prayer. These struggles were taken seriously, for the cloister was understood as a battlefield where the devil sought to disturb even the holiest souls. At the same time, dreams could bring immense consolation. Many accounts describe monks dreaming of angels singing or saints offering guidance. A nun might dream of the Virgin Mary, reassuring her of God's love. These visions were embraced as blessings, signs that the dreamer's devotion had drawn heaven's favor. In communities where physical comforts were few, such dreams provided nourishment for the spirit, strengthening resolve in the face of hardship. Some monasteries preserved written collections of remarkable dreams. These records reveal a fascinating mixture of theology and psychology. A 12th century monk might describe dreaming of a brilliant light filling the chapel, awakening with tears of joy. Another might tell of dreaming of purgatory, where souls begged for prayers. Such accounts were not dismissed, but studied, prayed over, and sometimes even used in sermons. They became teaching tools, reminding others of the rewards of virtue and the dangers of sin. Dream books also found their way into monastic settings, though their use was sometimes controversial. Some abbots warned against relying too heavily on manuals, cautioning that only God could reveal the true meaning of dreams. Still, monks and nuns, like lay people, were curious. Symbolic interpretations of animals, objects, and events offered ways to understand the strange imagery that filled their nights. A monk might wonder what it meant to dream of a lion, or a nun of a blossoming tree. The manuals offered answers: courage, purity, hope, even if the community treated them with care. One unique feature of monastic dreams was their link to communal identity. A vision experienced by one monk could be seen as relevant to the entire monastery. If a brother dreamed of a storm threatening the cloister, the community might interpret it as a warning of upcoming trials, perhaps political conflicts, famine, or illness. If a nun dreamed of the convent bathed in light, it could be seen as confirmation that the sisters were living faithfully. In this way, individual dreams became communal experiences, binding the group together in shared interpretation. Monastic leaders sometimes had their authority reinforced by dreams. Abbots or abbesses who dreamed of saints blessing them might share these visions with their communities, strengthening their spiritual standing. Conversely, a leader troubled by nightmares might confess them openly, showing humility and reinforcing the need for collective prayer. Dreams thus played a role in governance as well as in personal devotion. Dreams in monasteries also intersected with visions of death and the afterlife. Many monks dreamed of their departed brothers, appearing to request prayers or to offer reassurance. These dreams were deeply significant, reinforcing the belief in the communion of saints and the thin boundary between living and dead. A monk who dreamed of his deceased abbot smiling peacefully might believe that the man's soul had found rest. A nun who dreamed of a departed sister suffering in purgatory would call for prayers on her behalf. These dreams kept the community mindful of its role in aiding souls beyond the grave. Some of the most famous medieval visions came from monastic contexts. The 12th century monk Peter the Venerable, for instance, recorded accounts of brothers who dreamed of heaven and hell, describing them in ways that echoed the broader theology of the Church. Such visions were not only spiritual experiences, but also literary ones, shaping the way medieval readers imagined eternity. Through these accounts, monasteries became not just places of prayer, but also centers of dream culture, preserving stories that influenced the wider world. Dreams could also be tools of self-examination. In the cloister, monks and nuns were encouraged to scrutinize their thoughts and desires, rooting out sin. Dreams provided a mirror for this process. A troubling dream might reveal hidden pride, anger, or lust. A consoling dream might affirm humility, charity, or devotion. Spiritual directors often guided their charges in interpreting such visions, using them as steps toward greater holiness. Yet there was always caution. Not every dream was to be trusted. Monastic writers often warned that the devil could disguise himself as an angel of light, tricking dreamers with false visions. A monk who dreamed of being praised might actually be tempted toward pride. A nun who dreamed of being chosen for greatness might risk vanity. For this reason, discernment was emphasized, and dreams were weighed carefully against Scripture and the teachings of the Church. Despite these warnings, dreams remained an integral part of monastic spirituality. They offered glimpses of the divine, sharpened moral awareness, and strengthened communal bonds. They reminded monks and nuns that their battle was not only in the waking hours of prayer and fasting, but also in the hidden hours of sleep. The dream world became another arena for devotion, another path toward the goal of union with God. So, as you imagine yourself in a medieval monastery, picture the stone walls of the dormitory, rows of narrow beds, and the distant sound of bells calling to prayer. You close your eyes and drift into sleep, surrounded by silence. In your dream, perhaps you see a light shining in the chapel, or hear angels singing at matins. You awaken with your heart full, convinced that even in the quiet of night, God has spoken. For the men and women of the cloister, such dreams were not fleeting. They were steps on the long, patient journey of the soul. While dreams filled the beds and minds of ordinary people, they also became powerful tools in the hands of poets, storytellers, and chroniclers. Medieval literature abounds with dream visions narratives in which the dreamer, often a poet or fictional character, falls asleep and experiences a symbolic journey. These dream poems and stories gave shape to cultural ideas about love, death, virtue, and destiny, weaving the private mystery of dreams into public art. Dream literature in the Middle Ages drew on ancient traditions, but transformed them into something distinctively medieval. Writers inherited ideas from classical sources, like Cicero and Macrobius, who had written about different kinds of dreams, some divine, some prophetic, some meaningless. Macrobius' classification of dreams influenced scholars for centuries, shaping the way medieval people thought about whether a dream could be trusted. But while classical authors analyzed dreams philosophically, medieval writers made them vivid, poetic, and often deeply moral. One of the most famous examples is Chaucer's Book of the Duchess. Written in the 14th century, it begins with a narrator who cannot sleep and decides to read a book about dreams. At last, he falls asleep himself and dreams of entering a forest where he meets a sorrowful knight. Through their conversation, he learns that the knight is mourning the loss of his beloved wife. The dream becomes a meditation on grief, love, and mortality. What makes it especially medieval is its blending of personal emotion with allegory. The dream world is both a reflection of the narrator's inner state and a symbolic landscape where deeper truths are revealed. Other dream vision poems followed similar patterns. In Pearl, an anonymous Middle English poem, the dreamer mourns his lost daughter. He falls asleep in a garden and dreams of seeing her across a shining river, clothed in pearls and speaking of heavenly wisdom. The dream becomes a dialogue between father and child, teaching lessons about faith, loss, and the promise of salvation. When the dreamer awakens, he is both comforted and sorrowful, reminded of the gap between earth and heaven. Here again, the dream functions as more than a personal vision. It becomes a space for theological reflection and poetic beauty. Continental writers also embraced dream visions. French poets composed allegorical works like the Roman de la Rose, in which the dreamer enters a walled garden and encounters figures representing love, reason, and fortune. The poem unfolds as both a romantic allegory and a philosophical meditation, showing how dreams could provide a stage for ideas larger than any single life. Italian poets, too, used dreams in their narratives, none more famously than Dante. His Divine Comedy, though broader than a single dream, includes visions so vivid that readers experience them as dreamlike journeys through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Dante himself describes falling into dreamlike trances as he ascends, emphasizing that the boundaries between dream, vision, and revelation were fluid. Dreams in literature often involved encounters with symbolic figures. A dreamer might meet Lady Fortune, who explained the fickleness of luck. Or they might meet allegorical characters like patience, pride, or justice, each offering lessons. These figures gave shape to abstract ideas, making them vivid and memorable. To read such a dream poem was to enter a world where morality walked and spoke, guiding the dreamer and, by extension, the reader toward wisdom. Love was one of the most common themes in dream literature. Courtly love, with its emphasis on longing, devotion, and unattainable desire, lent itself naturally to dream settings. In many poems, the dreamer fell asleep and saw the beloved in an idealized form, often within gardens or castles that symbolized both beauty and confinement. These dreams reflected the tensions of medieval love between passion and morality, between freedom and duty. Through dreams, poets could explore the sweetness and pain of love in ways that resonated deeply with their audiences. Dream visions also gave writers freedom to address sensitive topics. Because dreams were understood as mysterious and symbolic, they offered a safe framework for criticism, satire, or lament. A poet could claim that he was only reporting what he saw in a dream, allowing him to comment indirectly on politics, social injustices, or personal grief. This dream framing gave works both authority and flexibility, making them powerful vehicles for reflection. In chronicles and histories, dreams were used to heighten drama and foreshadow events. Chroniclers often described kings or nobles dreaming before battles, with visions that predicted victory or defeat. These literary dreams served as narrative tools, linking historical events to divine providence. They reminded readers that history itself unfolded under God's guidance, visible even in the visions of sleep. Not all dream literature was solemn. Some dream visions were playful or humorous, filled with strange creatures, nonsensical landscapes, or satirical twists. In these works, the dream setting allowed writers to explore the absurdities of life, poking fun at human folly. Readers enjoyed the mixture of comedy and reflection, recognizing that even silly dreams could reveal truths about pride, greed, or foolishness. Dreams also served as bridges between worlds. In poems like Pearl, they connected the living and the dead. In others, they joined earthly concerns with heavenly visions. By presenting dreams as journeys, writers captured the sense that sleep could transport the soul across boundaries, showing places that waking eyes could never see. This idea resonated with medieval audiences, who already believed dreams carried messages from God or glimpses of the afterlife. The imagery of dream literature often overlapped with that of visual art. Manuscripts were illuminated with dream scenes, figures lying asleep beneath trees, surrounded by symbolic animals or angels. Stained glass windows in some churches even depicted dreamers, like Joseph or the Magi, asleep while angels appeared above them. These artistic echoes reinforced the literary tradition, making dreams a recognizable and respected motif across multiple forms of culture. Perhaps the most striking feature of medieval dream literature is its combination of intimacy and universality. On one hand, these works often begin with the solitary figure of a dreamer, lying down in bed or falling asleep in a garden. On the other, the dream quickly opens into vast landscapes of meaning, filled with allegory, theology, and philosophy. Readers were invited to see themselves in the dreamer's role, sharing in the vision and its lessons. For medieval audiences, to read a dream poem was not to escape reality, but to engage with it more deeply. Dreams offered a way to speak about grief, love, morality, and faith in forms that were both imaginative and instructive. They reflected the belief that dreams were not meaningless, but were doorways to truths too great for waking life alone. So, as you imagine yourself as a medieval listener, sitting by the fire while a poet recites a dream vision, picture the hush that falls over the room. The dreamer lies down and drifts into a symbolic world, gardens of roses, rivers of pearls, voices of saints and angels. You listen, knowing that the dream is not only a story, but also a mirror of your own hopes and fears. In this way, medieval dream literature turned the mysteries of the night into shared journeys of meaning, carrying listeners into realms of both imagination and faith. The Middle Ages were an age of journeys. Some were forced peasants moving after poor harvests, soldiers marching to battle. Others were chosen merchants seeking fortune, or pilgrims walking to shrines and holy places. Travel was difficult, dangerous, and filled with uncertainty, but it also carried a sense of adventure and transformation. Unsurprisingly, dreams of travel and pilgrimage were common, echoing both the practical realities of movement and the spiritual longing for journeying toward God. For ordinary villagers, dreams of travel often reflected hope or worry. To dream of setting out on a road might signify change in fortune, the start of a new chapter in life. A dream of carrying heavy loads on a long path could symbolize burdens and struggles. Dreams of being lost on a journey revealed the anxieties of survival, fears of famine, wolves, or robbers on real medieval roads. But a dream of arriving safely at a destination, whether a town or a church, could be a comforting sign that challenges would be overcome. Pilgrimage carried special weight in medieval imagination. To dream of walking to Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, or Rome was more than fantasy. It could be interpreted as a call from God. Pilgrims believed their journeys purified the soul, and dreams of pilgrimage were often seen as encouragement to make or complete such a journey. Stories circulated of people who dreamed of saints beckoning them to a shrine, and who, upon following the dream's direction, found healing or blessing. Dream books included many entries related to travel. To dream of walking on a straight road was interpreted as a sign of virtue and steady progress. To dream of wandering into tangled paths meant confusion or moral danger. Bridges symbolized transitions. To cross a bridge in a dream was to overcome a trial, but to fall from one suggested failure or betrayal. Rivers and seas appeared often too. Calm waters suggested safe passage. Storms warned of peril. These interpretations made sense in a world where travel was physically demanding and symbolically tied to the soul's journey. Monks and nuns also reported dreams of pilgrimage, even if they never left their cloisters. For them, such dreams represented the inner journey of the soul toward God. A monk might dream of walking a long road toward a brilliant light, while a nun might dream of climbing a hill crowned with a radiant cross. These visions reinforced the idea that even without physical travel, the soul was always on a pilgrimage through life toward eternity. Merchants, accustomed to real travel, often dreamed of markets, ports, and roads. A merchant dreaming of successful trade might interpret it as a sign of prosperity ahead, while a dream of losing goods on the road could spark caution in business dealings. For soldiers, dreams of travel were often linked to campaigns. A dream of marching safely might encourage confidence, but a dream of ambush could inspire fear. Such dreams often reflected the daily concerns of people whose lives were tied to movement across dangerous landscapes. One fascinating aspect of travel dreams was their connection to death. In medieval thought, life itself was a journey, and death the final passage. To dream of traveling far, or of reaching a shining city, could be interpreted as a foreshadowing of death and the soul's entry into the afterlife. Pilgrimage dreams, in particular, blurred the line between earthly travel and eternal destiny. A dream of arriving at a great cathedral might be comforting, not only as a sign of earthly blessing, but also as a reminder of heaven's gates. Communities often took travel dreams seriously. If someone dreamed of a journey filled with obstacles, neighbors might caution against rash decisions in daily life. If a person dreamed of successfully reaching a shrine, it could be seen as encouragement for the whole group to pray more fervently. In a time when travel was risky, dreams of safe arrival offered reassurance to families waiting for news of loved ones. Stories of saints often included travel dreams. Pilgrims were said to have dreamed of saints guiding them along roads or protecting them from danger. Some even claimed to have been told in dreams exactly which shrine to visit for healing. These accounts reinforced the sacredness of pilgrimage and the belief that God and the saints were active guides, not only on waking journeys, but in the dream world as well. Literature also embraced travel dreams. Allegorical works often describe dreamers wandering through strange landscapes, forests, deserts, or mountains on their way to symbolic destinations. These dream journeys mirrored the challenges of moral and spiritual life, showing how one must endure hardship to reach salvation. In Dante's Divine Comedy, though written at the edge of the medieval era, the entire narrative is framed as a journey, blending dreamlike vision with pilgrimage allegory. Travel dreams sometimes carried playful or fantastical elements. A villager might dream of flying on the back of a bird, or of riding a horse across impossible distances. These dreams could be interpreted as symbols of freedom, escape, or longing. They gave people a way to imagine lives beyond the limits of their daily toil, even if only in sleep. Still, danger was never far from these visions. Dreams of getting lost in forests, of being robbed on the road, or of wandering endlessly without finding home reflected real medieval fears. Roads were perilous, with bandits, wild animals, and poor conditions. A dream of losing one's way was not only symbolic, but also grounded in the practical anxieties of travel. Interestingly, some dreams of travel included companions. To dream of journeying with friends or family might be interpreted as a sign of loyalty and support. To dream of traveling alone, by contrast, could suggest vulnerability. If companions abandoned the dreamer in a vision, it might be taken as a warning of betrayal or loneliness. These themes reflected the social nature of medieval life, where survival depended on community bonds. In times of plague or war, dreams of travel could also symbolize displacement. Refugees who lost their homes might dream of wandering endlessly. Such visions were poignant reminders of instability, reflecting both the trauma of uprooted lives and the deep longing for safety and belonging. Despite their variety, travel and pilgrimage dreams carried a unifying message. Life was a journey, filled with trials, but always moving toward a destination. Whether that destination was a market town, a holy shrine, or the gates of heaven, dreams of travel mirrored the medieval conviction that the soul itself was always on the road. So, as you drift into rest, picture yourself as a medieval dreamer. You close your eyes and find yourself on a long, winding road. The air is cool, the stars above guide your steps, and in the distance, you see the spire of a cathedral or the glow of a holy shrine. Perhaps you are joined by companions, or perhaps you walk alone, but always the road stretches onward. When you awaken, you know the dream was more than a passing fancy. It was a reminder that life itself is a pilgrimage, and that every step, even in sleep, brings you closer to your destination. Few experiences shaped the Middle Ages more profoundly than war. Kings fought for crowns, lords defended their lands, and peasants were swept up in campaigns not of their choosing. Castles rose and fell, banners clashed on fields, and entire regions lived under the shadow of conflict. In such a world, it is no surprise that dreams of battles and war were common. For knights and soldiers, they reflected fears and ambitions. For villagers, they echoed anxieties of invasion and loss. And for chroniclers and poets, they became symbolic visions of destiny, morality, and the struggle between good and evil. Knights often reported dreams of combat. These visions might show them defeating enemies with shining swords, or falling beneath the blows of opponents. For a knight, such dreams could be interpreted as omens of future battles, warnings from God, or tests of courage. A dream of victory might inspire confidence, while a dream of defeat could stir anxiety or lead to confession. In a culture where honor and reputation were tied to martial success, dreams of battle were never taken lightly. Rulers, too, dreamed of war. Chronicles tell of kings who saw battles in their sleep before they occurred. A ruler might dream of angels granting him a sword, suggesting divine favor in an upcoming campaign. Or he might dream of a collapsing fortress, interpreted as a sign of defeat. These dreams were often retold by chroniclers as explanations for historical events, reinforcing the idea that wars unfolded under God's guidance, visible in the dreamworld before they appeared on the battlefield. For peasants, war dreams carried a different weight. They were less likely to dream of glory and more likely to dream of loss. Villagers might see their homes burning, their fields trampled, or soldiers taking their animals. Such dreams were not mere fantasy. They reflected real dangers, for armies often lived off the land, leaving destruction behind. A peasant who dreamed of soldiers might awaken with dread, interpreting it as a warning to prepare for hardship. Dream books included entries on battle imagery. To dream of fighting with swords was sometimes read as a sign of conflict in daily life arguments, rivalries, or moral struggles. To dream of victory in combat could suggest overcoming challenges, while to dream of wounds might signal sickness or betrayal. Horses and banners appeared frequently in these dreams, their colors and conditions carrying symbolic meaning. A broken spear might foretell failure, while a shining shield promised protection. These symbolic readings gave dreamers a way to interpret martial visions, whether or not they ever set foot on a battlefield. Nightmares of war were particularly vivid. Soldiers often described dreams of being trapped, surrounded, or struck down. These could be interpreted as demonic assaults, exploiting the fear of death. Yet they could also be taken as divine warnings, urging confession before battle. Many knights went into combat believing their dreams had foretold the outcome. Some even altered strategies, or sought blessings based on what they had seen in sleep. Literature made full use of battle dreams. Epic tales and chansons de geste often depicted warriors dreaming before great conflicts. In the Song of Roland, for example, ominous dreams foreshadow disaster at Rungsvau Pass. Such visions heightened the drama, reminding audiences that even heroes were subject to fate and divine will. Poets used dreams of war to illustrate the thin line between human ambition and God's judgment. Dreams of battles were not always literal. Many were allegorical, depicting the soul's struggle against sin. Monks sometimes dreamed of fighting beasts or demons, interpreting them as spiritual battles. A sword in such dreams could symbolize faith, while armor represented virtue. These allegorical war dreams reinforced the idea that every Christian, not just soldiers, was engaged in combat, the invisible war for the soul. Communal interpretations of war dreams were common. If several villagers dreamed of soldiers or fire, the community might see it as a sign of approaching conflict. In times of political unrest, such shared visions could spread fear or hope, depending on their nature. Dreams became part of the collective imagination, shaping how people prepared for uncertain futures. At times, war dreams offered surprising comfort. A widow who dreamed of her fallen husband victorious in shining armor might interpret it as reassurance that he had died honorably and entered heaven. A soldier who dreamed of surviving battle might awaken with renewed courage. In this way, dreams softened the brutality of war, offering meaning and hope amidst violence. There are recorded stories of rulers changing their actions based on dreams. A king who dreamed of disaster might delay a campaign, fearing divine disfavor. Another who dreamed of victory might press forward with boldness. Chroniclers often presented these choices as proof that God directed history, sending messages in the night. Whether or not the outcomes matched the visions, the stories endured, blending memory, prophecy, and belief. Symbols of war extended beyond the battlefield. Dreams of burning cities, crumbling towers, or abandoned fortresses often carried broader meanings: political instability, betrayal, or moral decline. Villagers might dream of castles falling and interpret it as a sign that their lords were failing them. Merchants might dream of roads blocked by armies, symbolizing lost trade. These images reflected the ways war touched every aspect of medieval life, from economy to faith. Not all war dreams were grim. Some described triumphal processions, banners flying, crowds cheering. These dreams offered reassurance of protection and order, especially during uncertain times. They reminded dreamers of the hope for peace through strength, even if reality was harsher. Dreams of war could thus contain both fear and aspiration, reflecting the dual nature of medieval life: vulnerability and resilience, terror and hope. The psychological weight of war dreams was immense. Soldiers carried them into battle, peasants into their fields, rulers into their councils. They influenced decisions, shaped morale, and reinforced the conviction that conflict was never merely human, it was tied to divine will. To dream of war was to glimpse the larger struggle that defined the age, between nations, between classes, and between the forces of good and evil. So as you close your eyes Imagine yourself as a medieval dreamer. Perhaps you are a knight in armor, dreaming of clashing swords and shining banners. Perhaps you are a villager, dreaming of soldiers marching through your fields. Perhaps you are a ruler, dreaming of a crown falling into ashes. Whatever the vision, you awaken with the sense that your dream is not only about battle, it is about destiny, morality, and the unseen forces shaping your world. For in the Middle Ages, dreams of war were never just shadows of sleep. They were omens, warnings, and reminders of the ceaseless struggles of both body and soul. For medieval people, dreams were never taken lightly. A peaceful vision might be a blessing, but a troubling dream could unsettle the heart, stir suspicion, or even inspire fear that the devil himself had been at work. Nightmares, visions of death, or dreams of betrayal might linger long after dawn, casting a shadow over the day. To guard against such dangers, people turned to remedies, some drawn from Christian devotion, others from folk tradition, and still others from the blending of both. These remedies, passed down through generations, show us how seriously dreams were treated and how closely sleep was bound to both faith and daily life. The most common response to troubling dreams was prayer. Medieval Christians were taught that the devil prowled most fiercely at night, attacking the soul through dreams. To counter this, people often recited prayers before bed. The Lord's Prayer, the Ave Maria, or the Creed might be spoken softly while crossing oneself. Some whispered invocations to guardian angels or to favorite saints, asking them to guard the bed against demonic intrusion. Monks and nuns ended their days with Compline, the final prayer service of the night, which included the song, "In peace I will lie down and sleep." For villagers, reciting even a short prayer before sleep could feel like surrounding the bed with invisible protection. Objects also played a role in safeguarding dreams. Many believed that iron repelled spirits, so a knife, horseshoe, or nail might be placed under the pillow or by the bed. Holy water, sprinkled around the chamber, was thought to drive away demons. Crosses hung above beds, and small reliquaries containing saintly relics were prized as powerful shields against nightmares. Some people carried amulets inscribed with prayers or biblical verses, which they tucked under pillows to ensure peaceful sleep. Herbs and plants were another important part of dream remedies. St. John's wort, long associated with protection, was burned or hung in houses to ward off evil. Rue, rosemary, and valerian were used as charms or brewed into teas believed to calm troubled minds. Lavender was placed under pillows to encourage restful sleep. In rural communities, wise women or healers often prepared bundles of protective herbs, binding them with string and instructing the dreamer to keep them near the bed. These remedies blended practical soothing effects, a calming sense of plants with spiritual symbolism. Chants and charms, often passed orally, offered additional layers of defense. Some were Christian in wording, invoking the names of God, Christ, or Mary. Others carried older echoes of pagan traditions, calling upon the natural world to shield the sleeper. A charm might be whispered 3 times while turning over in bed, or spoken aloud while placing a hand on the heart. Though the church sometimes frowned upon such practices, in daily life, the line between prayer and charm was often blurred. For ordinary villagers, what mattered most was that the nightmare would not return. Communal rituals also played a role. If a person suffered repeated troubling dreams, family members or neighbors might join in prayers for protection. In some places, a priest could be called to bless the home, sprinkling holy water in the bedchamber. In others, villagers turned to local healers, who offered folk remedies alongside spiritual advice. Dreams were not seen as private matters alone. They could affect the whole household or village, and so remedies were often communal acts of care. Some believed that behavior before bed could influence dreams. Eating too heavily was thought to invite disturbing visions as the body struggled with digestion. Drinking too much wine could cause troubling fantasies. To guard against nightmares, people were advised to eat lightly in the evening, to avoid quarrels before bed, and to cleanse their thoughts with prayer. In this way, remedies were as much about daily discipline as about magical protection. Dream books occasionally included remedies alongside interpretations. After describing the meaning of a troubling vision, they might recommend reciting a psalm, giving alms, or fasting. These remedies linked dreams to moral action. A nightmare was not only a sign of danger, but also a call to reform one's life. To heal the dream, one must heal the soul. Children, especially, were thought to be vulnerable to nightmares. Parents placed charms near their cradles, such as small crosses or bits of blessed bread. Lullabies often carried protective words, soothing the child while also invoking spiritual guardianship. If a child awoke crying from a nightmare, mothers sometimes traced the sign of the cross on their forehead, whispering prayers until peace returned. These tender rituals reveal how deeply families sought to protect not only bodies, but also dreams. At times, troubling dreams were believed to come from restless spirits or souls in purgatory. In such cases, remedies included offering prayers for the dead, commissioning masses, or giving alms on their behalf. By helping the departed, the dreamer hoped to calm the visions. This practice shows how remedies extended beyond the individual, linking dreams to the wider spiritual community of both the living and the dead. Nightmares of demonic assault required stronger remedies. People believed that demons could press upon the chest, suffocate the sleeper, or stir sinful desires. To resist such attacks, prayers were spoken aloud, holy names invoked, or even physical crosses held close. Some accounts describe monks rebuking demons in dreams with the words of Scripture, awakening convinced they had fought a real spiritual battle. Villagers, lacking such training, relied on relics, amulets, or the intervention of priests to protect them. There was also a belief in turning, a dream using ritual words or actions to reverse its power. If someone dreamed of death, they might whisper upon waking, "May it be turned away." Others bit 3 times to the left, or knocked on wood, actions meant to break the hold of the vision. These small gestures reveal the sense that dreams had real power, but also that they could be countered with equally real remedies. Interestingly, remedies were not always about banishing dreams. Sometimes they were about remembering and interpreting them properly. A person might tie a string around their finger before bed, believing it would help recall important visions. Others placed special stones or herbs beneath their pillows to encourage true dreams. These practices show the dual attitude toward dreams. They could be dangerous, but they could also be valuable, and remedies helped people navigate both possibilities. The remedies themselves were often soothing in ways we can still recognize. Herbs like lavender and valerian genuinely calmed the body, promoting sleep. Rituals of prayer and blessing created a sense of safety, quieting the mind. Even if the supernatural beliefs differ from modern views, the underlying practices reveal a timeless human desire for peace in the night. So, as you imagine yourself in a medieval cottage or monastery, picture the rituals that ended the day. A prayer whispered softly, a sprig of rosemary tied near the bed, a small cross hung on the wall. You close your eyes, comforted by the sense that you are protected from troubling dreams. If a nightmare comes, you awaken and trace the sign of the cross, whispering words of strength until calm returns. In this way, the medieval world wove prayer, nature, and tradition into a tapestry of remedies, ensuring that even in the darkest hours of night, hope and protection were never far away. For centuries, dreams held a central place in medieval life. They were divine messages, demonic temptations, warnings, and comforts. They were shared at hearths, recorded in chronicles, and immortalized in poems. Yet as the Middle Ages drew to a close and the Renaissance began, the cultural weight of dreams began to change. The world was shifting scientifically, spiritually, and socially, and with those shifts came a gradual decline in the traditional beliefs surrounding dreams. One of the strongest forces in this transformation was the rise of scholastic thought in early science. Medieval universities, growing in influence during the 13th and 14th centuries, encouraged study not only of theology, but also of medicine and natural philosophy. Scholars began to consider dreams not solely as divine or demonic, but also as natural phenomena. Drawing on classical sources like Aristotle and Galen, they suggested that dreams could arise from the body's humors, imbalances of blood, bile, or phlegm, rather than purely from the soul. A heavy meal might cause vivid dreams, not because of demonic attack, but because of digestion. These explanations did not erase traditional beliefs overnight, but they introduced new ways of thinking that slowly took root. At the same time, the Church maintained a cautious stance. While visions from God were still possible, Church authorities increasingly warned against superstitious uses of dream books and charms. By the 15th century, many theologians discouraged ordinary people from trusting their dreams too much, fearing that they might fall into heresy or divination. Confessors were instructed to remind the faithful that while God might use dreams, most were likely to be natural or even deceptive. In this climate, the exalted status of dreams began to fade. The spread of printing in the 15th century also changed the landscape. Dream manuals continued to circulate, but now they competed with a flood of new text scientific treatises, devotional works, and practical guides that shifted attention away from dream interpretation. As literacy expanded, people encountered new ways of understanding the world, and dreams were no longer the primary lens through which mysteries were explained. Social and cultural changes also played a role. The Black Death of the 14th century had shaken faith in traditional explanations, and while dreams of death and the afterlife remained powerful, people increasingly sought comfort in ritual and devotion rather than in visions of sleep. Political upheavals, too, shifted attention. Wars, revolts, and the growing power of states made dreams less central to public life. Where once a king's dream might be recorded as a prophecy, chronicles in the later Middle Ages began to emphasize strategy, diplomacy, and human action instead. Art and literature revealed this shift as well. Early medieval poems had celebrated dream visions as windows into truth. By the 15th century, writers often treated dreams with irony or skepticism. In some texts, dreamers awoke mocking their own visions, or the dream was used as a playful frame for satire rather than as a solemn revelation. This literary change mirrored broader attitudes. Dreams were still intriguing, but they were less often taken as binding or prophetic. Still, the decline was not absolute. Among ordinary people, traditional dream beliefs endured well beyond the Middle Ages. Villagers continued to share dreams of weather, harvests, or loved ones, and folk remedies for nightmares persisted in households. In rural areas, dream books remained popular into the early modern period, sold alongside almanacs and charms. Even as scholars grew skeptical, the folk imagination kept dreams alive as tools of meaning. One key factor in the decline of medieval dream culture was the shift toward new scientific explanations of the mind. Renaissance thinkers, influenced by rediscovered classical texts, began to explore human psychology in ways that foreshadowed later developments. Dreams were increasingly seen as reflections of personal thoughts, memories, or bodily states, rather than as direct interventions by God or demons. This did not eliminate their mystery, but it changed the framework in which they were understood. The Protestant Reformation further reshaped attitudes. Reformers like Martin Luther acknowledged that God might still speak through dreams, but they emphasized Scripture and faith as the true sources of guidance. Suspicion of superstition led many Protestants to dismiss dream interpretation as dangerous or frivolous. Catholic authorities, too, grew more cautious, focusing instead on sacraments, visions of canonized saints, and official miracles. Dreams, once central to spirituality, were gradually pushed to the margins. By the 16th century, the once rich medieval culture of dreams had fragmented. Among scholars, dreams were studied as natural phenomena. Among reformers, they were often treated with suspicion. Among villagers, they remained part of folk tradition, but even there, their authority weakened as new ideas spread. Dreams were still shared and remembered, but they no longer shaped kingdoms, guided monasteries, or carried the same weight of divine certainty. And yet, in a sense, the medieval dream world never fully disappeared. Its symbols and stories lingered. The belief that teeth falling out foretells death, or that flying represents freedom, can still be traced back to medieval dream books. Literature continued to use dream motifs, even when ironically. And in popular imagination, the idea that dreams carry hidden meanings never vanished. What declined was not the fascination with dreams, but the unquestioned faith in them as divine or demonic messages. The slow fading of medieval dream beliefs reflects the larger transformation of the late Middle Ages. The world was turning toward Renaissance humanism, scientific inquiry, and religious reform. The mysteries of sleep, once explained in terms of angels and demons, were increasingly framed as natural, psychological, or symbolic. Yet the longing for meaning in dreams, the desire to see in them reflections of hope, warning, or comfort, remained as strong as ever. So as you imagine the end of the medieval world, picture villagers still whispering of their dreams at dawn, monks recording visions in the quiet of monasteries, and kings recounting omens before battles. At the same time, picture scholars debating humors, printers spreading new books, and reformers warning against superstition. Slowly, the dream world of the Middle Ages was fading, but it was not gone. It lived on in folk tales, in poetry, and in the quiet moments of sleep. And perhaps, as you close your eyes tonight, you will find yourself stepping into that twilight of history, dreaming of a world where heaven and earth once seemed to meet in visions of the night, and where even as beliefs shifted, the mystery of dreams remained. And so, we come to the end of our journey through the dream world of the Middle Ages. We have wandered through royal chambers and peasant cottages, monasteries and battlefields, and even into the realms of heaven and hell. We have seen how dreams were not dismissed as idle fancies, but embraced as messages, warnings, and comforts. To medieval people, the night was never silent. It was alive with voices, symbols, and visions that shaped their waking lives. Dreams connected them to God, to saints, to lost loved ones, and to the hidden fears and hopes of the heart. They were both deeply personal and profoundly communal, shared at the hearth, in sermons and in chronicles. Though the centuries have passed and beliefs have shifted, the mystery of dreams endures. Even today, when we awaken from a vivid vision, we often wonder, was it only the mind or something more? In this, we are not so different from our medieval ancestors. If you have enjoyed this long and gentle exploration, I invite you to join our community by subscribing to History for Sleep. It helps support the channel and ensures you miss future journeys into the forgotten corners of the past. I'd also love to hear from you. What kinds of history are you most curious about? Do you listen at night, while winding down, or during quiet moments in the day? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your ideas often inspire the topics we cover next. For now, let your mind rest. May your own dreams tonight be peaceful, whether they bring you images of medieval gardens, glowing saints, or simply the comfort of sleep. Thank you for spending this time here. Until we meet again in another story, may history guide you gently into rest, and may your dreams carry you safely through the night.